Have you ever wondered how an entire city woke up before the invention of the alarm clock? Deep in the soot-stained streets of the 19th century, a silent figure moved through the fog, armed only with a long pole and a list of names. This is his story, a journey through the quietest hours of history, designed to lead you into a deep, restful sleep. And honestly, if you tried to live this life even for a week, you probably won't survive this level of sleep deprivation and damp wool. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. There's something oddly comforting about knowing someone in Tokyo or Toronto is drifting off alongside you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir in your cramped room as the city sleeps, feeling the sharp chill of morning air seep through the glass. The time is somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, that liminal hour when even the rats have paused their scurrying. Your breath fogs slightly in front of your face, a small cloud that dissipates into the darkness. The bed beneath you is thin, a straw mattress on a wooden frame, perhaps shared with a sibling or a spouse who still slumbers on, oblivious to the duty calling you. Outside, London is a study in silence. Not the peaceful quiet of countryside nights, but the heavy, expectant hush of a metropolis holding its breath. The cobblestones are slick with overnight dew and the ever-present coal dust that settles on everything like a second skin. Historians still argue whether the famous London fog was truly natural, or largely an industrial byproduct, a thick pea soup brewed from factory smoke and household fires. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, and your bare feet meet the cold floorboards. The shock travels up your spine, a jolt that helps shake off the last clinging tendrils of sleep. This is your ritual, repeated nearly every night. The gradual awakening, the mental preparation for the work ahead. You are a knocker-up, one of hundreds in this city alone, employed by factories, workshops, and private households to ensure that workers rise in time for their shifts. Before reliable personal timepieces, before electric alarms, you are the human alarm clock, and your reliability is your livelihood. A single tallow candle flickers on the small table beside your bed, its flame casting long, dancing shadows that make the sparse furnishings seem to breathe. The smell is distinct. Animal fat and wick smoke, a scent that clings to your clothes and hair. Mainstream historical records from the era note that knocker-ups typically earned between 1 and 6 pence per week per client, a modest but steady income that required meticulous route planning and punctuality. You reach for your woolen stockings, the fabric coarse against your skin. Dressing is a slow, deliberate process in the dim light. Each layer is a barrier against the damp chill that waits beyond your door. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups carried small pea shooters to tap on higher windows, a fringe technique that occasionally led to complaints about being woken by what felt like a tiny projectile rather than a polite tap. As you pull on your heavy woolen trousers and button your waistcoat, you listen. The building around you is still. A distant church bell might chime the quarter hour, its sound muffled by the fog. Your movements are practiced, economical. There's no rush, not yet. The city won't stir for hours, but your clients depend on your precision. You pause just for a moment to let your eyes adjust fully to the darkness. The window shows only a deeper black, but you know what lies beyond. The narrow street, the row of identical doorways, the gas lamps that burn low through the night. Your mind begins to map your route, not on paper, but in memory. The weaver on Crane Court needs a firm double tap at 3:15. The dockworker's wife on Mill Lane prefers a softer series of taps so as not to wake her infant. These details are your currency, your reputation. The candle gutters slightly, and you shield it with your hand as you stand. Your shadow looms large against the wall, a silent companion for the journey ahead. You take a slow, deep breath. The air tastes of coal smoke and damp stone, the perfume of your profession. And so, with your tools within reach and your route clear in your mind, you prepare to step from the warmth of your room into the waiting silence. The night is long, the streets are cold, but there's a strange comfort in the routine, in knowing your place in the great sleeping machine of the city. You bundle yourself in thick, scratchy garments while a single tallow candle casts long, wavering shadows across the floorboards. The wool is heavy, intentionally so. It's your armour against the persistent damp that clings to London's early morning air. You start with the undershirt, coarse linen that has been washed so many times it's grown soft in patches but remains stiff along the seams. Then comes the waistcoat, buttoned carefully from bottom to top, each button a small victory against the chill. The main coat is a masterpiece of practical design. Thick Melton wool, dark in colour to hide the soot and grime that will inevitably settle on it during your rounds. It reaches mid-thigh, providing extra warmth for your core while allowing freedom of movement for your arms. Historical accounts from the period describe knocker-ups as typically wearing substantial outer garments, suitable for prolonged exposure to the elements, a necessity when your job requires you to stand motionless outside clients' windows for minutes at a time. You pull on your woolen stockings next, rolling them up your calves with practiced efficiency. They're darned in several places, the repairs nearly invisible in the candlelight. Footwear is crucial. You select your sturdy leather boots, worn smooth at the heels from countless miles of cobblestone. The leather is treated with dubbin to repel moisture, though in London's perpetual damp, it's a losing battle. As you dress, the candle flame dances in the draught from the window, casting your shadow large against the wall. It's a solitary performance, this nightly preparation. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups carried small, hidden pockets sewn into their coats for holding clients' payments, tiny coin purses that could be accessed without removing gloves, a clever adaptation for cold mornings. You fasten a woolen scarf around your neck, tucking the ends into your coat. The fabric smells faintly of lanolin and wood smoke, a scent that will become as familiar to you as your own skin. Your gloves are next. Thick, fingerless woolens that allow dexterity while keeping your hands warm. You'll need that dexterity for handling your tools, for counting coins in the dim light, for writing notes if a client has special requests. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups typically worked alone or in pairs in the busiest districts. Some ledger entries suggest team routes, while personal diaries describe solitary journeys through the fog. The debate matters less to you in this moment than the practical reality. Your route is yours alone, your reputation built on consistent, reliable service. You pause to adjust your cap, a soft woolen thing that fits snugly over your ears. It's not fashionable, but fashion holds no warmth. The cap will protect you from the worst of the fog's dampness, though you know from experience that by the end of your shift, your hair will be slightly moist regardless. As you complete your dressing ritual, you take stock of yourself in the small foggy mirror hanging beside the door. The figure looking back is practical, prepared, anonymous. This is intentional. Your clients need to trust your punctuality, not know your life story. The uniform of your profession is designed for function, not recognition. You check your pockets, a small notebook for notes, a pencil stub, a few coins for emergency purchases, and a tiny oilskin packet containing a bit of tobacco for those moments when you need to steady your nerves, or simply take a brief, warming pause. The candle has burned lower now, its light more subdued. You shield it as you move toward the door, your boots making soft thuds on the wooden floor. The room behind you is sparse, a bed, a table, a chair, a wash basin. Everything has its place, everything serves a purpose. There's no room for clutter when you rise while the world sleeps. You pause at the door, one hand on the latch. Through the wood, you can sense the cold waiting beyond. It's not just temperature, it's the weight of the silent city, the expectation of the work ahead. But there's also a strange comfort in the routine, in the knowledge that while others dream, you have a purpose, a path, a role in the great machinery of the city waking up. You take a final breath of the relatively warmer air inside, then turn the latch. The door opens silently, you've oiled the hinges yourself, and you step across the threshold, leaving the candle's small pool of light behind. You carefully choose your waking tools, testing their balance before wrapping the handles for the long, damp route ahead. In the corner of your room, leaning against the wall like faithful companions, rest your instruments of awakening, the long bamboo pole and the shorter, sturdier tapping stick. You approach them with the reverence of a craftsman selecting his chisels, because in your line of work, these aren't just sticks, they're extensions of your purpose. The bamboo pole is your primary tool, lightweight yet strong, capable of reaching second-story windows without the need for ladders or noise. You run your gloved hand along its length, feeling for any splinters or weak spots. Mainstream historical records indicate that knocker-ups in industrial cities like Manchester and Leeds often used poles ranging from 6 to 12 feet in length, depending on the architecture of their assigned districts. You select the 9-foot pole tonight, the versatile middle ground for the mixed-height buildings on your route. Next, you inspect the tapping end. It's fitted with a small, padded tip, leather stuffed with horsehair, to ensure the tap against glass is firm enough to wake a sleeper, but gentle enough not to shatter the pane. The sound it produces is distinctive, a soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap that becomes a familiar lullaby in reverse. Historians still argue whether the padded tip was a universal standard or a personal customization. Some contemporary illustrations show bare bamboo ends, while written accounts frequently mention softened knockers to avoid property damage complaints. You set the long pole aside temporarily and pick up the shorter tapping stick. This is for ground floor windows, for doors with glass panels, for situations where precision matters more than reach. It's made of dense hickory, worn smooth by countless mornings of use. The handle is wrapped in thin leather strips, providing grip even when your gloves are damp with fog. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups experimented with different materials for the tapping end. Cork, rubber, even small leather pouches filled with sand, to create varying sounds for different clients, a personalized service that could mean the difference between a retained customer and a lost one. You test the weight of each tool, hefting them slightly to feel their balance. Muscle memory takes over. You've done this so many times that your body knows the exact grip, the precise angle for the most effective tap. You practice a few silent motions in the dim light, the poles moving through the air with barely a whisper. It's a dance you've perfected, one that must be executed with consistency night after night. As you prepare your tools, you also check your secondary equipment. A small oilcloth bag contains chalk for marking doors if a client needs a special note, a bit of twine for emergency repairs to your pole, and a tiny vial of oil for squeaky hinges you might encounter. These aren't part of your official toolkit, but experience has taught you that preparedness prevents problems. The fringe history of knocker-ups includes tales of practitioners who carried miniature lanterns with coloured filters, red for urgent wake-ups, green for routine taps, though most historians consider this an embellishment rather than standard practice. You wrap the handles of both poles with fresh strips of soft cloth, securing them with small knots that won't slip. This isn't just for comfort, it's for silence. The last thing you want is the sound of wood sliding against wood echoing through a sleeping street. Every detail matters when your profession depends on being heard by the right person at the right time, and by no one else. As you finish preparing your tools, you arrange them for easy carrying. The long pole you'll hold vertically, its base resting near your foot as you walk. The short stick fits neatly into a loop on your belt. You move with them briefly around the small room, ensuring they don't catch on furniture or make noise against the walls. It's a final rehearsal before the real performance begins outside. The candle on the table has burned nearly to its end, its light now a faint, wavering glow. In this diminished illumination, your tools take on an almost ceremonial quality. They are simple objects, bamboo, wood, leather, padding, but in your hands they become instruments of order in a city that depends on punctuality. Factories cannot start their machines without workers. Ships cannot load without dockhands. Bakeries cannot knead dough without early risers. And none of them rise without someone like you, standing in the fog, tapping gently on glass. You take a moment to appreciate the craftsmanship of your tools. The bamboo pole was sourced from a specialty importer in the East End, selected for its straight grain and flexibility. The hickory stick came from a carpenter who understood the unique demands of your work. Even the padding on the tapping end was carefully chosen, horsehair for resilience, leather for durability. These aren't mass-produced items, they're bespoke instruments for a very specific trade. As you stand there, tools in hand, you feel a sense of readiness settle over you. The chill of the room no longer bothers you. Your layers of wool do their job. The silence outside is no longer intimidating. It's your canvas. You know the route, you know the client, You know the rhythm of the night. And now, with your tools prepared and your mind focused, you are ready to step into that silence and begin your work. You adjust your grip on the long pole one final time, feeling its familiar weight. The short stick rests securely at your side. There's a quiet confidence in this preparation, a knowledge that you are equipped for what lies ahead. The city sleeps, but soon, very soon, you will be the gentle force that stirs it to life. You cross your threshold into absolute stillness, guided only by the pale sulphurous flicker of distant gas lamps. The door clicks softly behind you, a sound so slight it's swallowed instantly by the fog, and suddenly you are immersed in the city's deepest sleep. The air hits you first, damp, cool, carrying the mingled scents of coal smoke, wet stone, and the faint metallic tang of the river somewhere beyond the buildings. It's a smell that belongs to these hours alone, a perfume of quiet industry paused. Your boots meet the cobblestones with a muted crunch, the sound carefully controlled by years of practice. You've learned to walk with a rolling gait, heel to toe, minimizing noise while maximizing stability on the uneven, often slick surfaces. Mainstream historical accounts of Victorian London frequently mention the notorious condition of street surfaces. Cobblestones worn smooth by traffic, mixed with mud, horse dung, and the ever-present coal dust that turned rain into a slippery black slurry. Your footing is sure, though. This is your terrain, your domain. The gas lamps cast pools of yellowish light that seem to float in the fog, their glow diffused into soft halos. Between these islands of illumination, darkness reigns thick, velvety, and complete. You move from one pool to the next, a shadow among shadows. The lamplighter has already done his rounds hours ago. Now, the lamps burn low through the night, tended by municipal workers who ensure they don't flicker out before dawn. Historians still argue whether the gaslighting of London truly reduced crime or simply created new pockets of shadow where mischief could hide. A debate that feels abstract as you pass beneath a sputtering flame, your breath fogging in its warmth. The silence is profound but not empty. If you pause to listen, and you often do as part of your work, you begin to hear the subtle symphony of the sleeping city, the distant trickle of water from a leaking pipe, the soft scuttle of a cat along a wall, the occasional creak of a building settling in the cool air. These are the sounds that accompany your journey, a backdrop to your purposeful steps. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups developed an almost supernatural ability to distinguish between harmless night noises and potential disturbances, a skill that occasionally led to them being called upon as informal night watchmen, though this was never part of their official duties. You pause at the corner of your street, orienting yourself. The fog swirls around your legs, dampening the hem of your coat. In this light, the familiar buildings take on strange shapes. A stack of crates becomes a lurking figure. A hanging sign swings like a ghostly arm. You've learned not to startle easily. Your mind filters the visual noise, focusing on landmarks. The crooked chimney here, the blue-painted door there. These are your signposts in the fog. As you begin your route in earnest, you notice the details that others miss at this hour. The frost beginning to crystallize on iron railings. The way fog collects in the hollows of cobblestones, creating miniature lakes that reflect the gaslight. The faint, rhythmic sound of a distant watchman's rattle, marking the hour. These observations aren't just poetic, they're practical. The frost tells you the temperature is dropping, meaning you might need to adjust your pace to stay warm. The fog's density affects how far your taps can be heard. Sometimes you need to tap louder, sometimes closer to the window. You pass a closed pub, its windows dark, its sign creaking gently on its iron bracket. Inside, chairs are stacked on tables, the floor swept clean for tomorrow's patrons. For now, it's as still as a tomb. You feel a fleeting connection to the people sleeping behind these walls. The publican, his family, his staff. All unaware of your passage, all dependent on your service to rise in time for the day's work. There's a strange intimacy in this one-sided relationship. You know their schedules, their preferences, their windows. They know only that a reliable tap comes when it should. The cobblestones underfoot have a history you can feel. Some are worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic. Others are newer replacements, their edges still sharp. You've learned which stones are loose, which might shift under your weight with an unexpected clatter. This knowledge comes from experience, from countless pre-dawn journeys. Mainstream historical records note that street maintenance in Victorian cities was often haphazard, with repairs done reactively rather than proactively, a reality you navigate with each careful step. As you walk, you maintain a mental tally of your progress. Time is your currency. Being early is as problematic as being late. Too early, and you risk waking a client before they need to rise, losing precious sleep they've paid you to preserve. Too late, and you risk them missing their shift, losing their employment, and consequently, losing you as a client. The pressure is quiet but constant, a metronome in your mind. The fog thickens momentarily as you pass a narrow alley, the air cooler damper. You pull your scarf a little tighter, your breath creating small clouds that vanish into the greater mist. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who claim to navigate by smell alone, identifying streets by the distinct odors of bakeries, tanneries, or breweries that operated on early schedules. While likely exaggerated, the kernel of truth is there. Your senses are heightened in these hours, attuned to details others overlook. You approach your first client's building, a narrow townhouse with a darkened facade. You know which window belongs to the weaver who starts his loom at 4. You position yourself silently, raise your long pole with practiced ease, and prepare for the first tap of the night. But before that moment you take a breath, feeling the weight of the city around you, the sleeping thousands, the quiet streets, the gentle fog. This is your world, these are your hours. And as you stand there, pole in hand, ready to stir the first sleeper, you feel not burden but purpose. You mentally trace your first stops through the thickening mist, letting your heavy leather boots find a steady, grounding rhythm. The route is etched into your mind not as a map, but as a sequence of sensations. The slight incline of Crane Court, the particular echo of Mill Lane, the way the fog pools deeper near the riverbank. You don't need to consult a paper. Your body knows the turns, the pauses, the precise number of steps between clients. This mental mapping is your most valuable asset. More than your poles, more than your punctuality. Mainstream historical records from trade directories show that knocker-ups often served the same districts for years, even decades, building an intimate, almost subconscious knowledge of their streets that no newcomer could quickly replicate. Your boots fall into a cadence that is both practical and meditative. Left, right, left, right. The sound is soft but consistent, a heartbeat against the cobblestones. You've learned that a steady pace conserves energy, keeps your body warm, and helps you maintain accurate time. Rushing leads to mistakes, a missed window, a miscounted minute, a client awakened too early or too late. The rhythm becomes a kind of moving meditation, a way to keep your mind sharp while your body performs its familiar task. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed personal walking songs or internal chants to maintain pace. A fringe suggestion based on a handful of diary entries that mention keeping time in the feet, though most scholars consider this poetic license rather than standard practice. As you move, you visualize each client's window, their preferred signal, their unique circumstances. The weaver on Crane Court. Firm double tap. Wait for the curtain twitch. Move on. The dockworker's wife on Mill Lane. 3 soft taps, pause, then 1 more if no response. The apprentice printer on River Street. A gentle scrape of the pole against the sill, since he's a light sleeper. These details aren't just notes. They're relationships built on trust. You are not just waking people. You are honoring agreements, respecting preferences, becoming a silent partner in their daily lives. The fog swirls around you, sometimes thinning to reveal a star-dappled sky, sometimes thickening until the gas lamps are mere smudges of light. You navigate by memory and by subtle cues. The change in air temperature near the river, the sound of water dripping from a particular gutter, the faint scent of yeast from the bakery that begins its work at 3:30. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups carried small hidden compasses or marked certain buildings with nearly invisible chalk symbols to aid navigation in dense fog, though most historians believe these were rare exceptions, as the best practitioners relied on sensory memory rather than tools. You pause briefly at a crossroads, not because you're uncertain, but because this is where your route branches. To the left, the residential lanes where private households pay for discreet, personalized service. To the right, the industrial quarter, where factories employ knocker-ups to wake entire shifts at once. Tonight you take the left fork first. The gentler start, the softer taps. Your mental map updates automatically. After Crane Court, Mill Lane, then the slight detour to check on the elderly seamstress who sometimes forgets to wind her clock. Your breathing steadies with your steps, in and out, a quiet counterpoint to the tap of your boots. The cold no longer bites. Your wool layers have trapped enough body heat to create a microclimate around you. You feel the weight of your poles, not as a burden, but as a comforting presence. Tools you trust, extensions of your intent. This is the paradox of your work. You are alone in the sleeping city, yet deeply connected to it. Every window you tap represents a life that depends on your reliability, a thread in the vast tapestry of the city waking up. As you approach your first client's building, you slow your pace almost imperceptibly. Precision now matters more than rhythm. You scan the facade, identifying the correct window by its slight asymmetry. The flower box that's always empty in winter, the curtain that's never fully drawn. You raise your long pole, the bamboo smooth in your gloved hand. The tip finds the glass with a soft practice tap, tap, tap. You wait, listening. Inside, a faint rustle, the creak of a floorboard, the soft glow of a lamp being lit. A signal, they're awake. You lower your pole, nod to no one and move on. The satisfaction is quiet but real. One client successfully woken, one step closer to completing your route. You don't linger. There's no time for reflection mid-journey, but the mental map updates. Crane Court, Weaver, 3:15 a.m. responsive. You file it away not as data but as muscle memory, as part of the living script of your night. The fog shifts again, revealing a sliver of moon behind the clouds. Its pale light adds a new dimension to your mental map. Shadows lengthen, shapes sharpen momentarily. You use these fleeting clarities to confirm your position, to adjust your internal compass. Mainstream historical accounts note that weather significantly impacted knocker-up work. Fog-muffled sound, rain made cobblestones treacherous, frost could freeze windows shut. Adaptability was as important as punctuality. You continue, your rhythm unbroken. The city around you remains asleep, but you feel its latent energy, the potential for movement, for noise, for life that will erupt in a few short hours. For now, though, it's yours. These quiet streets, these fog-wreathed buildings, this profound stillness, they belong to you and your fellow night workers, the lamplighters, the bakers, the milk deliverers, the watchmen. You are the unseen architects of the morning, laying the groundwork for the day to come. As you move toward your next client, you let your mind wander just slightly, not to distraction but to appreciation. The way the fog clings to iron railings like lace, the soft hush of your boots on wet stone, the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the river. These are the details that make your work not just a job, but an experience. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who claim to hear the city dreaming in these hours, a low, collective murmur of sleepers' breaths, of settling buildings, of distant trains. While likely romanticized, the sentiment rings true. In the silence you become attuned to subtleties others never notice. Your mental map guides you effortlessly now, each turn anticipated, each landmark recognized. You are not just walking a route, you are flowing through a landscape you know intimately, a dance choreographed by repetition and care. The fog, the cold, the darkness. These are not obstacles but elements of your craft. And as you approach the next window, pole raised, ready to tap, you feel not fatigue but focus. The night is long but you are prepared. The city sleeps, but you are its gentle wake-up call. Your steady footsteps create a rhythmic percussion that guides you through the narrow, sleeping lanes. The sound is distinctive, not the sharp clack of daytime foot traffic, but a soft, more deliberate crunch-roll crunch as your boots meet wet cobblestone. You've learned to modulate your stride, lighter on gravel patches, firmer on smooth stone, always mindful of loose cobbles that might shift and betray your presence with an unexpected clatter. Mainstream historical records from Victorian municipal reports note that street surfaces in working-class districts were often poorly maintained, with frequent complaints about loose sets and uneven pavements that posed hazards for night workers like yourself. The alleyways you navigate are narrow by design. London's medieval street plan never anticipated the industrial boom, and the result is a labyrinth of passages barely wide enough for two people to pass. You move through them with ease, your shoulders angled slightly to avoid brushing against damp brick walls. The fog clings thicker here, trapped between buildings, creating a tunnel of muted light and sound. Your breath fogs in front of you, a personal cloud that moves with you, marking your passage through the stillness. Your rhythm becomes a kind of sonic anchor. In the profound quiet of these hours, even small sounds carry further than you might expect. The soft scuff of your boot, the gentle rustle of your wool coat, the faint creak of leather as you adjust your grip on your pole. These are the notes of your nocturnal symphony. You've learned to listen to your own sounds as much as to the environment around you. If your footsteps suddenly echo differently, it might mean you've entered a new type of space, a courtyard, a covered passage, a street that opens unexpectedly onto a square. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed an almost musical sensitivity to acoustic feedback in different urban spaces. A fringe theory based on a handful of memoirs that mention listening to the street's voice, though most scholars consider this poetic metaphor rather than literal practice. As you walk, you become aware of the architecture around you in new ways. The brickwork isn't just brick. It's a texture, a temperature, a sound surface. Smooth, glazed bricks reflect your footsteps differently than rough, porous ones. Iron railings create subtle harmonics when the wind passes through them, a faint, almost musical hum that you've learned to distinguish from other night sounds. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups claim to identify streets by their acoustic signature alone, a skill that supposedly allowed them to navigate even in complete darkness or dense fog. While likely exaggerated, the kernel of truth is there. Your senses adapt to the demands of your work, becoming tools as reliable as your bamboo pole. Your pace remains steady, but not monotonous. You vary your stride slightly depending on the terrain, shorter steps on inclines, longer strides on flat stretches, a careful sidle when passing under low-hanging signs or washing lines. This isn't just practicality, it's a form of mindfulness. By paying attention to each step, you keep your mind sharp, your body warm, your timing accurate. The cold tries to seep into your bones, but movement is your defense. Each step generates a small amount of heat. Each breath, though visible in the fog, keeps your lungs working efficiently. You pass a courtyard where a single cat watches you from a windowsill, its eyes reflecting the gaslight like twin moons. It doesn't move. You don't pause. This is your shared world, these quiet hours, and you both understand the unspoken rules. No sudden movements, no loud noises, no disruption of the delicate balance of the night. The cat will return to its hunting. You will continue your rounds. Both of you are creatures of these hours, adapted to the unique demands of darkness. The alley opens slightly onto a wider lane, and the sound of your footsteps changes. Less echo, more diffusion. You adjust your mental map automatically. This is the transition point between the residential warren and the more orderly streets where clerks and shopkeepers live. The architecture shifts too. Taller windows, cleaner facades, the occasional hint of prosperity in the form of potted plants or freshly painted doors. Your clients here have different expectations, softer taps, more discretion. Sometimes a small coin left on the windowsill as a tip. Mainstream historical accounts note that knocker-ups often charged higher rates for gentle or discreet service in wealthier districts, a reflection of the class dynamics that shaped every aspect of Victorian urban life. Your rhythm adapts without conscious thought. The taps you'll deliver here will be lighter, the pauses longer, the retreat more silent. You've practiced this versatility. It's part of your professional toolkit. Just as your poles have different ends for different windows, your approach has different modes for different neighborhoods. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who carried multiple sets of tools for different districts, delicate silk-wrapped poles for affluent areas, sturdy bamboo for industrial zones, though most historians believe this was rare, as the best knocker-ups achieved versatility through technique rather than equipment. As you continue, you become aware of other night sounds blending with your footsteps. The distant clatter of a milk cart on a main road, the soft coo of pigeons nesting in a church tower, the faint, rhythmic splash of a waterman poling his boat on the river. These sounds don't distract you, they orient you. They're markers in your mental map, confirming your location, your progress, your place in the larger ecosystem of the sleeping city. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups coordinated informally with other night workers to avoid overlapping routes or disturbing each other's clients. A debate fueled by sparse ledger entries that mention route agreements but lack detailed explanation. Your boots find a familiar rhythm again as you enter a particularly narrow passage, barely wide enough for your shoulders. The walls on either side are close enough to touch, and the fog seems thicker here, trapped like breath in a bottle. Your footsteps echo slightly, bouncing off the brick, creating a soft percussive loop that follows you. You've learned to use this echo to your advantage. If the sound changes suddenly, it might mean a door has opened, a window has shifted, someone else is in the passage. In your line of work, awareness is survival. The cold is a constant companion, but you've made peace with it. Your wool layers trap warmth. Your movement generates heat. Your focus keeps your mind from dwelling on discomfort. You've learned that fighting the cold wastes energy. Accepting it, working with it, is more efficient. The fog dampens sound, muffles distance, creates a sense of isolation that could be unsettling if you let it. But you don't. You've trained yourself to find comfort in the solitude, to see the fog not as a barrier, but as a blanket that wraps the city in quiet. As you approach the end of the alley, you slow your pace almost imperceptibly. The next client is near, a ground floor window with a distinctive iron grille. You adjust your grip on your short tapping stick, ready for the precise signal this client prefers. But before that moment, you take one last mental note of the rhythm that brought you here. The steady, grounding percussion of your boots on cobblestone. The sonic thread that has guided you through the sleeping lanes. It's more than just movement. It's meditation, navigation, preparation. And as you raise your stick ready to tap, you carry that rhythm with you. A quiet heartbeat in the heart of the sleeping city. You reach the weaver's window and deliver the exact signal he's paid for. No more, no less. The building rises before you, a narrow townhouse with a facade of soot-stained brick and a single gas lamp flickering weakly above the door. You know this window, second floor, third from the left, with a slight crack in the lower pane that you've learned to avoid with your pole's tip. The fog swirls around your legs as you position yourself, your boots finding a stable spot on the uneven cobblestone. You raise your long bamboo pole, feeling its familiar weight, its balanced heft. The padded leather tip hovers for a moment before the glass, and then, tap tap. The sound is crisp but soft, designed to penetrate sleep without shattering peace. Mainstream historical records indicate that knocker-ups developed highly specific tapping patterns for different clients, almost like a Morse code of awakening. A double tap might mean, rise now, while a triple tap could signal, you have extra time. Some practitioners even used varying rhythms to convey messages. A quick succession for urgent wake-ups, a slower cadence for leisurely starts. The weaver on Crane Court has paid for the firm double tap. No more, no less, because his loom starts at 4 and he needs exactly 45 minutes to dress, eat a quick bite, and walk to the mill. Precision isn't just professionalism, it's economics. Wake him too early and you waste his precious sleep. Wake him too late and he risks losing his job and you, your client, you wait. Pole still, raised, listening. Inside the silence holds for a heartbeat, too. Then, the soft rustle of bedding, the creak of a floorboard under cautious feet, the faint click of a tinderbox striking flint. A small warm glow begins to bloom behind the curtain. The weaver is lighting his lamp. This is your confirmation, your receipt. You lower your pole slowly, silently, and take one step back into the fog. You don't linger, you don't watch. Your job is done, his day begins. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups carried tiny mirrors on extendable handles to peek at window responses without being seen. A fringe technique mentioned in a handful of trade anecdotes, though most historians dismiss it as impractical for foggy conditions and likely apocryphal. The satisfaction is quiet but real. One client, successfully woken. One agreement honored. You feel the slight vibration still humming in the bamboo pole. The residual energy of the tap, transmitted through wood and leather to your gloved hand. It's a tactile feedback loop you've learned to read. A firm tap produces a certain resonance, a weak one, another. Over time, you've calibrated your strength to produce the ideal sound for each type of glass, each thickness of curtain, each sleeper's depth of slumber. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed a standardized tap intensity scale, or if each practitioner relied solely on personal experience. A debate fueled by conflicting diary entries and trade manuals that offer vague advice like tap with purpose, but not with force. You pivot smoothly on your heel, your boots making barely a sound on the wet stone. The fog seems to close behind you as you move away from the window, swallowing your silhouette. You don't look back. You don't need. Your mental map updates automatically. Crane Court Weaver, 3:15 a.m. responsive. The entry is filed not in a ledger but in muscle memory, in the living script of your night. This internal catalogue is your most valuable asset, more reliable than paper, which can be lost or damaged, more immediate than memory alone, which can falter in fatigue. As you walk to your next client, you reflect on the tap you just delivered. It wasn't just a sound, it was a conversation, a question. Are you awake? And the answer, in rustles and light, yes, I am. This silent dialogue is the core of your work. You are not a disturbance, you are a facilitator. You don't intrude, you assist. The weaver doesn't see you, likely never has, but he trusts you. That trust is earned through consistency, through precision, through the quiet professionalism of a tap that is always exactly what was agreed upon. Mainstream historical accounts from workers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups by name, praising their reliability in an era when timekeeping was communal rather than personal. The fog thickens momentarily as you pass a narrow alley, and you adjust your grip on your pole instinctively. Dampness can make bamboo slippery. You've learned to compensate with a slightly firmer hold, a more deliberate motion. The cold seeps through your gloves, but you barely notice. Focus is your warmth. The next client is a dockworker's wife on the mill lane, who prefers 3 soft taps followed by a pause, then one more if no response. Her husband leaves for the docks at 3:45, and she needs to prepare his meal, mend his coat, see him off with a word of encouragement. Your tap isn't just waking her, it's supporting a household, a family, a small economy of care. You approach her building, a slightly wider townhouse with a flower box under the window, empty now in winter, but you remember the geraniums that brightened it in summer. You raise your pole again, but this time your motion is softer, more nuanced. Tap, tap. You pause, counting silently in your head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. No response yet. Tap. The final signal. You wait, listening. The soft shuffle of slippers, the gentle pull of a curtain cord. A lamp glows behind the fabric. You lower your pole, nod once to the night, and move on. The rhythm of your work begins to feel like a dance. Approach, position, tap, wait, confirm, retreat. Each movement is practiced, economical, silent. You've rehearsed this sequence so many times that it flows without conscious thought, freeing your mind to monitor time, weather, route conditions. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who could tap with one hand while consulting a pocket watch with the other, all while navigating cobblestones in dense fog, a skill supposedly honed through years of practice, though most historians consider this an embellishment rather than standard capability. As you continue your rounds, you become aware of the subtle variations in your tapping technique. For the apprentice printer, who's a light sleeper, you use the very tip of your pole, barely grazing the glass. For the elderly seamstress who's hard of hearing, you tap a bit firmer, on the wooden frame rather than the pane, to transmit vibration through the structure. These adaptations aren't written down. They're learned through experience, through feedback, through the quiet art of paying attention. Mainstream historical records note that successful knocker-ups were often praised for their discretion and adaptability, traits that couldn't be taught in manuals but only absorbed through practice. The fog swirls around you, sometimes thinning to reveal the faintest hint of dawn, a pale grey at the eastern edge of the sky. You note the time mentally, nearly 3:30. You're on schedule. Your route is designed not just for efficiency, but for pacing. Harder taps early in the night when clients are in deeper sleep, softer ones later, as dawn approaches and sleep grows lighter. This temporal sensitivity is part of your craft. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups adjusted their techniques seasonally, tapping louder in winter when windows were shut tight, softer in summer when casements were open. A debate based on sparse weather logs and anecdotal accounts. You pause briefly at a corner to consult your internal clock. The city is still asleep, but you can feel the latent energy building. the distant rumble of an early coal cart, the faint whistle of a factory preparing its boilers. These are the first whispers of the coming day, and you are the bridge between night and morning. Your taps are the gentle catalysts that transform sleep into action, rest into labor, silence into the symphony of a city waking up. As you move toward your next client, you carry the rhythm of your work with you, the precise tap tap tap, the patient wait, the quiet confirmation. It's more than a technique, it's a philosophy. In a world of chaos and change, you offer consistency. In an era of uncertainty, you provide reliability. And as you raise your pole again, ready to deliver another exact signal, you feel not just duty but purpose. The city sleeps, but you are its gentle, precise, unwavering wake-up call. You pause in the fog, listening for the soft signs that your client has stirred awake. After the tap-tap fades into the damp air, silence returns. But it's a different silence now. It's expectant, charged with the possibility of response. You stand perfectly still, your pole lowered but ready, your breath held just slightly to sharpen your hearing. The fog swirls around your ankles, a silent companion in this moment of waiting. Mainstream historical records from Victorian trade guides emphasize that knocker-ups were trained to recognize the subtle auditory cues of awakening, the soft rustle of bedding, the creak of floorboards under cautious weight, the faint click of a lamp being lit. These weren't just sounds. They were confirmations, receipts for services rendered. Your ears become finely tuned instruments. You filter out the ambient noise of the sleeping city, the distant trickle of water, the occasional scuttle of a rat, the soft sigh of wind through alleyways, and focus on the building before you. You're listening for the specific signature of your client's awakening. The weaver might shuffle heavily, his boots hitting the floor with a familiar thud. The dockworker's wife might move more quietly, her slippers whispering across wood. The apprentice printer might stir with a soft yawn, barely audible through glass and curtain. These distinctions matter. They tell you not just that your tap was heard, but how it was received. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed a formalized system for categorizing client responses, a fringe theory based on a handful of ledger notations that mention response codes. Though most scholars believe practitioners relied on personal memory and intuition rather than standardized classifications, you watch the window, not intrusively but attentively. The curtain is a soft barrier, diffusing the light within. If your client is responding, you might see the faint glow of a lamp brighten as it's lifted from a bedside table. You might see the curtain twitch slightly as a hand reaches to adjust it. These visual cues complement the auditory ones, creating a multi-sensory confirmation. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups carried tiny concealed listening tubes, primitive stethoscopes made of hollow reed or metal, to better hear responses through thick glass or heavy curtains. While mentioned in a few colorful memoirs, most historians consider this an embellishment, as the fog and distance would likely render such devices impractical. Time stretches in these moments of waiting. A minute can feel like an eternity when you're standing still in the cold, listening for a sign, but you've learned to use this time productively. You mentally review your route, the next client, their preferred signal, any special considerations. You assess the weather. Is the fog thickening, requiring louder taps? Is the temperature dropping, meaning you should move more quickly between stops to stay warm? You check your internal clock. Are you on schedule, or do you need to adjust your pace? This multitasking isn't conscious. It's habitual, honed through repetition. Mainstream historical accounts note that successful knocker-ups were praised for their mental agility and route management, skills that couldn't be taught but only absorbed through experience. The cold tries to seep into your stillness, but you've developed techniques to combat it. You shift your weight subtly from one foot to the other, generating small amounts of heat without creating noise. You breathe slowly through your scarf, warming the air before it reaches your lungs. You keep your gloves dry by tucking them into your coat when not handling your pole. These micro-adjustments are part of your craft, as important as the tap itself. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed personal rituals for staying warm during waiting periods, a debate fueled by diary entries that mention secret warming techniques, but provide no specifics. You hear it, the soft rustle of bedding, the gentle creak of a floorboard. Your client is stirring. You don't move. You don't react visibly. But internally, you note the confirmation. The tap was successful. The agreement is honored. The quiet satisfaction is real but restrained. There's no time for celebration, only for continuation. You lower your pole completely now, relaxing your grip slightly. The waiting is over. The moving begins again. As you prepare to step away, you take one last sensory snapshot of the moment. The way the fog clings to the window frame, creating a soft halo around the glass. The faint, warm glow behind the curtain, a promise of activity within. The subtle change in the building's soundscape, from the deep silence of sleep to the gentle noises of awakening. These details aren't just poetic, they're practical. They help you refine your technique, adjust your approach, improve your service. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who could predict a client's mood for the day based on the speed and quality of their response, a skill supposedly honed through years of observation, though most historians consider this romantic speculation rather than documented practice. You pivot smoothly, your boots making barely a sound on the wet cobblestone. The fog seems to embrace you as you move away, swallowing your silhouette. You don't look back. You don't need to. Your mental map updates automatically. Client responded, signal successful, proceed to next. This internal catalogue is your most valuable asset, more reliable than paper, more immediate than memory alone. It's a living document, written in sensation, updated in real time. As you walk to your next client, you reflect on the waiting period you just completed. It wasn't passive. It was active listening, attentive observation, professional patience. In a world that often values speed over precision, you offer the counterbalance, the willingness to pause, to listen, to confirm. This isn't just good service, it's good philosophy. Mainstream historical records from workers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups as silent partners in the industrial machine, essential but unseen, reliable but unobtrusive. The fog thickens momentarily as you pass a narrow alley, and you adjust your pace instinctively. Dampness affects sound transmission. You've learned to compensate by tapping slightly firmer in dense fog, allowing extra time for responses. The cold seeps through your layers, but you barely notice. Focus is your warmth. The next client is an elderly seamstress on River Street, who sometimes forgets to wind her clock and relies on your tap more than others. Her window is ground floor, with a distinctive flower box that's empty in winter. You raise your short tapping stick, ready for the gentle scrape against the sill that she prefers, a softer signal for a lighter sleeper. You approach, position tap. Then, the waiting begins again. You stand in the fog, listen. The silence holds. You hear the distant rumble of an early coal cart, the faint whistle of a factory boiler. But closer, nothing yet. This is part of the craft. The ability to distinguish between absence of response and delay of response. Sometimes a client is a heavy sleeper. Sometimes they're momentarily distracted. Your job isn't just to tap, it's to interpret. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed standardized waiting periods for different client types. A debate based on sparse trade manuals that offer vague advice like, wait long enough for a response, but not so long as to delay the route. You hear it. The soft shuffle of slippers, the gentle pull of a curtain. A lamp glows behind the fabric. Confirmation. You lower your stick, nod once to the night, and move on. The rhythm of your work continues. Tap, wait, confirm, retreat. Each cycle is a small victory, a quiet affirmation of your role in the great machinery of the city waking up. As you continue your rounds, you carry the lesson of the wait with you. Patience is power, listening is leadership, stillness is strategy. In a world of noise and haste, you offer the counterpoint. The value of the pause, the importance of the response, the beauty of the quiet confirmation. And as you approach your next window, pole raised, ready to tap and wait once more, you feel not just duty but devotion. The city sleeps, but you are its patient, attentive, unwavering witness to the dawn. Each client's preference becomes a mental note, a living map you carry in your mind. You don't consult a paper ledger as you walk. You don't pause to flip through pages in the fog. Instead, your memory is your ledger, written in sensation, updated in real time. The weaver on Crane Court, 3:15 a.m., responsive within 2 minutes. The dockworker's wife on Mill Lane, 3 soft taps plus 1, 3:30 a.m., Curtain twitch confirmation, the apprentice printer on River Street. Gentle scrape on sill. 3:45 a.m. Light sleeper, allow extra response time. These aren't just data point, they're relationships, agreements, small contracts of trust that you honor night after night. Mainstream historical records from Victorian trade directories. Note that successful knocker-ups often served the same clients for years, building an intimate, almost subconscious knowledge of their preferences that no newcomer could quickly replicate. Your mental map isn't static, it's dynamic, adaptive, alive. You adjust entries based on feedback. If a client is slower to respond on foggy mornings, you note to tap slightly earlier next time. If a new baby means a mother needs a softer signal, you modify your approach without being asked. This flexibility isn't just good service, it's professional survival. In a competitive trade where reputation is everything, the knocker-up who remembers, who adapts, who anticipates, is the one who retains clients. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed formal mnemonic systems for client management, a fringe theory based on a handful of diary entries that mention memory palaces and sensory catalogues, though most scholars believe practitioners relied on repetition and routine rather than elaborate mental techniques. As you walk between stops, you rehearse your upcoming clients silently, like an actor reviewing lines before a performance. You visualize each window, its height, its frame, its curtain, its quirks. You recall the preferred signal, tap pattern, intensity, location on the glass. You anticipate the likely response. Quick stir, slow rise, occasional need for a second tap. This mental rehearsal isn't anxious. It's confident, practiced, automatic. Your mind has become a well-organized filing system, where each client has a dedicated folder, tagged with time, location, preference, and history. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups supposedly used physical aids to supplement memory. Tiny notches carved into their poles, colored threads tied at specific intervals, or even subtle scents applied to different sections of their route. While mentioned in colorful anecdotes, most historians consider these embellishments, as the fog and darkness would likely render such markers impractical. You pause briefly at a crossroads, not to consult a map, but to let your mental catalogue update. The fog swirls around you, dampening sound, softening edges. In this moment of stillness you review completed clients, pending stop, time elapsed, time remaining. Your internal clock is remarkably accurate, honed by necessity since pocket watches were expensive and not all clients could afford to provide one. Mainstream historical accounts note that many knocker-ups developed an almost supernatural sense of time, able to estimate the hour within minutes based on star position, fog density, or the subtle changes in ambient sound as dawn approached. This temporal intuition was as valuable as any tool in your kit. As you move toward your next client, you carry your mental map with you, not as a burden but as a compass. It guides your steps, informs your taps, shapes your waiting. You don't just remember preferences, you embody them. Your muscle memory knows the exact arc for the weaver's double tap, the gentle pressure for the seamstress's scrape, the patient pause for the dockworker's wife. This embodiment isn't conscious, it's habitual, honed through repetition. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups experienced a form of procedural memory so deep that their bodies could execute complex sequences without conscious thought. A debate fueled by memoirs that describe walking the route in sleep or tapping in dreams, though most scholars consider this poetic metaphor rather than literal phenomenon. The fog thickens momentarily as you enter a narrow lane and you adjust your mental map automatically. Sound travels differently here. Echoes bounce off close brick walls. You note to tap slightly firmer, allow extra time for response. The cold seeps through your layers, but you barely notice. Focus is your warmth. The next client is a baker's assistant on Oven Alley who needs a sharp triple tap at 4 a.m. sharp, because the ovens must be stoked precisely at 4:15. You visualize the window, ground floor, with a small square pane that's slightly warped from heat. You recall the signal, 3 firm taps on the lower corner, where the glass is thickest. You anticipate the response, quick, efficient, often accompanied by the faint scent of yeast drifting through the crack under the door. You approach, position, tap. The sound is crisp, clear, exactly as agreed. You wait, the response is immediate. The soft shuffle of feet, the gentle clink of a baker's peel against stone, confirmation. You lower your pole, nod once to the night, and move on. Your mental map updates. Oven alley, baker's assistant responsive. The entry is filed not in ink, but in sensation, in rhythm, in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. As you continue your round, you become aware of the subtle ways your mental map evolves. New clients are added with careful attention. Their preferences are noted, rehearsed, embodied. Former clients are archived with respect. Their windows become landmarks rather than destinations. Changes are integrated seamlessly. A client who moves, a preference that shifts, a time that adjusts. This adaptability isn't just practical, it's philosophical. In a world of constant change, you offer continuity. In an era of uncertainty, you provide reliability. Mainstream historical records from workers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups as living archives of neighborhood rhythm, keepers of communal time in an age before personal timepieces. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who could recite their entire client list backward, or who dreamed in tap patterns, or who could identify a client by the sound of their window alone. While likely exaggerated, the kernel of truth is there. Your memory isn't just a tool, it's your trade. It's what separates the professional from the amateur, the reliable from the forgetful, the valued from the replaceable. As you walk, you let your mind wander just slightly, not to distraction, but to appreciation. The way your mental map isn't just a list, but a landscape, a terrain of windows, times, taps, and responses that you navigate with the ease of long familiarity. The fog, the cold, the darkness. These aren't obstacles to your memory, they're its context. You don't remember in spite of the conditions, you remember because of them. The challenge sharpens the skill. The necessity hones the craft. You approach your next client, a night watchman who's ending his shift and needs to be woken to collect his pay. His window is high, third floor, with a distinctive iron grille. You raise your long pole, feeling its familiar weight. Your mental map provides the details instantly. 2 firm taps on the upper pane, wait for the curtain pull, then 1 soft tap as confirmation. You execute the sequence without conscious thought, your body remembering what your mind has catalogued. The response is prompt. The curtain twitches, a hand appears, a coin glints briefly in the gaslight before vanishing into your oilskin packet. Transaction complete. Agreement honored. As you lower your pole and step back into the fog, you feel not fatigue, but flow. Your mental map is working perfectly, guiding you, informing you, supporting you. It's more than memory, it's mastery. And as you move toward your next stop, pole in hand, mind clear, you carry that mastery with you. A quiet confidence in the living map you've built, tap by tap, night by night, in the heart of the sleeping city. You observe the fog's dance with the city's architecture as you move between stops. The mist isn't just weather, it's a collaborator, a performer, a silent partner in your nocturnal ballet. It swirls around iron railings like liquid lace, clings to brickwork like a second skin, pools in cobblestone hollows like miniature lakes that reflect the gaslight in soft, diffused orbs. You've learned to read the fog's movements, how it thickens near the river, thins on elevated streets, eddies around corners, and settles in courtyards like a gentle blanket. Mainstream historical records from Victorian meteorological journals note that London's famous fog was often a complex mixture of natural mist and industrial smoke. A pier super, brewed from coal fires, factory emission, and the city's unique topography that trapped moisture in its urban canyons. As you walk, you become a connoisseur of fog. You notice how it interacts with different materials, how it beads on waxed leather but soaks into wool, how it clings to cold iron but slides off warm stone, how it muffles sound in narrow alleys but carries it further in open squares. These observations aren't just poetic, they're practical. The fog's density affects how far your taps can be heard. Its temperature influences how quickly your breath freezes on your scarf. Its movement can signal changes in weather that might impact your route. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed informal forecasting skills based on fog behavior, a fringe theory based on diary entries that mention reading the mist to predict clearing or thickening, though most scholars believe practitioners relied on experience and intuition rather than systematic meteorology. The iron railings you pass are more than just barriers. They're sculptures in the fog, their intricate patterns softened by the mist into ghostly silhouettes. You've learned to navigate by their shapes, the scrolled finials on Crane Court, the simple bars on Mill Lane, the ornate cast-iron designs in the wealthier districts. Each style tells a story of the neighborhood's character, its prosperity, its history. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups supposedly used railings as impromptu percussion instruments, tapping them gently to create distinctive sounds that could wake clients through open windows. A technique mentioned in a handful of colorful memoirs, but largely dismissed by historians as impractical and potentially damaging to property. You pause briefly beneath a gas lamp, watching the fog swirl around its iron post. The light creates a halo effect, illuminating the mist in a soft golden glow that seems to dance and shift with every breath of air. It's mesmerizing, this interplay of light and vapor, and for a moment you allow yourself to appreciate it. This isn't just atmosphere, it's art. The city in these quiet hours becomes a gallery of shadow and light, texture and tone, and you are both observer and participant in its creation. Mainstream historical accounts from Victorian artists and writers frequently mention the aesthetic qualities of London fog, describing it as both a nuisance and a source of beauty, a duality you experience firsthand every night. As you continue your route, you notice how the fog affects your senses. Sound is muffled, distances are compressed, landmarks soften at the edges. You've learned to compensate, tapping slightly firmer in dense fog, allowing extra time for responses, relying more on tactile and spatial memory than visual cues. The cold is more penetrating when the fog is thick, but you've adapted. Your wool layers trap warmth more effectively when damp. Your movements generate heat that counteracts the chill. Your focus keeps your mind from dwelling on discomfort. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed specialized techniques for foggy conditions, a debate fueled by trade manuals that offer vague advice like adjust your tap to the air, but provide no specific methodologies. The fog swirls around a particularly ornate set of railings outside a townhouse in a wealthier district, and you pause to appreciate the craftsmanship. The ironwork is intricate. Scrolls, leaves, flowers, all rendered in delicate detail that's softened but not obscured by the mist. You recall that this client prefers a softer tap, more discretion, a quicker retreat. Your mental map updates automatically. Affluent district, ornate railing, gentle signal, minimal presence. The fog in this moment becomes part of the service. It conceals your movements, muffles your footsteps, allows you to be present without being intrusive. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who claimed the fog itself was an ally, helping them move unseen and unheard through the sleeping city. A sentiment that, while romanticized, contains a kernel of practical truth. As you move between stops, you become aware of the fog's rhythm. It doesn't just sit, it moves, it breathes. It responds to temperature changes, to air currents, to the subtle shifts in the city's own respiration as dawn approaches. You've learned to sync your pace with its flow, slowing when it thickens, quickening when it thins, pausing when it eddies around a corner. This isn't conscious, it's intuitive, honed through repetition. Your body knows the fog's language as well as your mind knows your route. Mainstream historical records from workers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups as children of the mist, adapted to its rhythms in ways that daylight dwellers could never understand. The cold is a constant companion, but the fog modifies its character. In dry cold, the chill bites sharply. In foggy cold, it seeps slowly, persistently. You've learned to dress accordingly. Layers that trap warmth but allow moisture to escape. Fabrics that retain insulation even when damp. Accessories that protect extremities without sacrificing dexterity. Your gloves, for instance, are wool but treated with a light oil to repel moisture. Your scarf is thick but woven loosely enough to allow breath without fogging your vision. These adaptations aren't just practical, they're professional. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed specialized clothing recommendations. A debate based on sparse trade guides that mention weather-appropriate attire, but provide few specifics. As you approach your next client, you notice how the fog interacts with the window you're about to tap. It clings to the glass, creating a soft frosted effect that diffuses the light within. You adjust your aim slightly, accounting for the moisture on the pane that might alter the sound of your tap. You've learned that foggy glass requires a firmer touch, a more deliberate motion. to ensure the signal penetrates both the vapor and the sleep. The response, when it comes, is slightly delayed. The fog muffles sound both ways. But you've anticipated this, allowing extra time in your mental schedule. You step back into the fog after confirming the wake-up, and it embraces you like an old friend. The mist swirls around your legs, dampens the hem of your coat, softens the edges of your silhouette. In this moment you are not separate from the fog, you are part of it. Your breath joins its vapor, your movement stirs its flow, your presence contributes to its mystery. The city sleeps, wrapped in this gentle shroud, and you are its quiet guardian, its gentle awakener, its faithful witness to the transition from night to day. As you continue your rounds, you carry the fog's lesson with you. Adaptability is strength, observation is wisdom, presence is power. In a world that often values clarity over nuance, you offer the counterpoint. The beauty of the soft edge, the value of the muted sound, the art of the gentle approach. And as you move toward your next window, pole in hand, fog at your feet, you feel not just duty, but harmony. The city sleeps, but you are its fluid, adaptive, unwavering companion in the mist. You enter the industrial quarter where taps become frequent and synchronized with shift changes. The transition is subtle at first, a gradual shift in the architecture, the air, the very rhythm of the silence. The narrow residential lanes give way to wider streets lined with warehouses, workshops, and the looming silhouettes of factory chimneys that pierce the fog like stone fingers reaching for a sky still dark with night. The cobblestones here are broader, worn smoother by heavy carts and iron-rimmed wheels, and your boots find a different cadence on their surface. Less crunch, more roll, a sound that carries further in the open space. Mainstream historical records from Victorian industrial surveys note that factory districts were often deliberately separated from residential areas, not just for practical reasons of noise and pollution, but to create distinct zones of labor and rest. A spatial logic you navigate with every step. The air changes first. It grows heavier, thicker, carrying new scents. The acrid tang of coal smoke, the metallic whisper of ironworks, the faint, oily smell of machinery at rest. These aren't unpleasant odors to you. They're markers, signposts in your mental map. You've learned to identify specific factories by their unique aromatic signatures, the sweetish burn of textile mills, the sharp bite of chemical works, the earthy damp of tanneries that begin their processes before dawn. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed an informal, scent catalogue of industrial districts, a fringe theory based on a handful of memoirs that mention navigating by nose, though most scholars believe practitioners relied more on visual and auditory cues than olfactory ones. Your pace adjusts automatically. In the residential lanes, your taps were spaced, deliberate, allowing time for individual responses. Here, in the industrial quarter, the rhythm quickens. Factories don't wake one worker at a time. They wake shifts, dozens, sometimes hundreds of hands who must arrive simultaneously to start the machines. Your taps become a staccato percussion. Tap, tap, tap at one window, pivot, tap, tap at the next. Move on without waiting for individual confirmations. The agreements here are different. Bulk contracts with factory foremen, standardized signals, collective responses. You're not just waking people, you're activating an economy. Mainstream historical accounts from factory ledgers note that knocker-ups were often employed on retainer by industrial enterprises, paid a flat weekly fee to ensure entire shifts arrived on time, a system that prioritized efficiency over personalization. The fog behaves differently here too. In residential areas, it clung to individual buildings, pooled in courtyards, softened edges. In the industrial quarter, it moves in broader currents, shaped by the heat rising from factory chimneys, the drafts created by wide streets, the thermal dynamics of brick and iron. You've learned to read these flows, where the fog thickens near steam vents, where it thins above warm cobblestones, where it eddies around the corners of warehouses. This knowledge isn't academic, it's practical. The fog's movement affects sound transmission, visibility, even the temperature of your tools. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed specialized techniques for industrial fog conditions, a debate fueled by sparse trade manuals that mention adjusting for factory mist, but provide few specifics. As you move deeper into the district, the silence begins to fracture, not with noise exactly, but with potential. You hear the distant clank of a coal cart being loaded, the soft hiss of a boiler being stoked, the rhythmic thump of a night watchman's rounds. These are the first whispers of industry stirring, the prelude to the symphony of labor that will erupt in an hour or two. You are the conductor of this prelude, your taps the gentle cues that bring each section in on time. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups supposedly coordinated with factory whistleblowers, using subtle signals to synchronize their final rounds with the official start-of-shift alarms. A practice mentioned in colorful anecdotes, but largely dismissed by historians as logistically improbable. Your tools feel different in this environment. The bamboo pole, so light and responsive in residential lanes, seems to carry more weight here, as if absorbing the gravity of the industrial landscape. The tapping stick, so precise for individual windows, feels almost delicate against the robust frames of factory dormitory panes. You've learned to adjust your technique, firmer taps for thicker glass, broader strokes for windows that open onto noisy courtyards, quicker sequences for buildings where multiple sleepers share a room. These adaptations aren't conscious, they're habitual, honed through repetition. Mainstream historical records from workers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups as industrial metronomes, keeping time for the great machine of factory production. The architecture around you shifts in scale and character. Buildings are larger, plainer, more functional. Windows are uniform, often arranged in repetitive grids that reflect the regimented lives within. Doors are heavy, reinforced, designed for frequent use rather than aesthetic appeal. You've learned to navigate this visual language. Which windows belong to dormitories, which to foremen's quarters, which to administrative offices that don't require your service. Your mental map updates automatically, categorizing not just by client preference, but by building function, shift schedule, and response protocol. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed formalized systems for industrial route planning, a fringe theory based on ledger notations that mention shift-based zoning. Though most scholars believe practitioners relied on experience and word of mouth rather than systematic methodologies. As you approach your first factory stop, you slow your pace almost imperceptibly. Precision still matters, even in the industrial rush. You identify the correct window, third floor, seventh from the left, with a distinctive crack in the upper pane that you've learned to avoid. You raise your long pole, feeling its familiar weight. The tap you deliver here is firmer, more assertive than in residential areas, not loud but authoritative, designed to cut through the deeper sleep of laborers who've worked long hours. Tap, tap, tap. You don't wait for individual confirmation. You move on immediately, trusting the system, the agreement, the collective response. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who could tap multiple windows in rapid succession, without missing a beat, a skill supposedly honed through years of industrial district work. Though most historians consider this an embellishment rather than standard capability. The cold feels different here too. In residential areas it was a personal companion, a chill you managed with layers and movement. In the industrial quarter, it's a shared condition, a collective experience that binds you to the workers you wake. You see their breath fogging the same air you breathe, feel the same damp seeping through the same cobblestones you tread. This isn't just empathy, it's solidarity. You're not an outsider waking sleepers. You're a participant in the same rhythm of labor and rest that defines industrial life. Mainstream historical accounts from social reformers sometimes mention knocker-ups as invisible links in the chain of industrial production, essential but unrecognized, reliable but uncelebrated. As you continue your rounds in the factory district, you become aware of a subtle shift in your own rhythm. Your steps quicken slightly, your taps become more economical, your pauses shorten. This isn't haste, it's efficiency. You've trained your body and mind to operate at different tempos for different districts, like a musician who can play both adagio and allegro with equal mastery. The fog swirls around you, the coal smoke tinges the air. The distant hum of preparing machinery provides a bass note to your percussive taps. You are in your element, not despite the industrial setting, but because of it. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups experienced a form of industrial flow state in these districts. A debate fueled by memoirs that describe losing oneself in the rhythm of the rounds. Though most scholars consider this poetic metaphor rather than literal phenomenon. You approach your next factory stop, a textile mill with rows of identical windows stretching into the fog. You raise your pole, deliver the agreed signal, pivot, move on. The sequence is fluid, automatic, practiced. Your mental map updates, mill dormitory, East Wing, 3:45 a.m., collective response assumed. You don't doubt the system. You trust the training, the agreement, the shared understanding that underpins industrial timekeeping. The city is beginning to stir around you, not with the gentle rustles of residential awakening, but with the purposeful preparations of labor, the clank of tools, the murmur of voices, the distant whistle of a steam engine building pressure. As you move between factory stops, you carry the industrial rhythm with you. The quickened pace, the assertive taps, the collective focus. It's more than a technique, it's a philosophy. In a world that often values individuality, you offer the counterpoint, the power of synchronization, the beauty of collective action, the dignity of shared purpose. And as you raise your pole again, ready to deliver another signal in the growing symphony of industry, you feel not just duty but devotion. The city sleeps, but you are its precise, efficient, unwavering catalyst for the day's work. Distant coal carts and steam whistles create a low, growing symphony around you. The silence that once wrapped the city like a blanket is beginning to fray at the edges, not with sudden noise, but with a gradual accumulation of sound, a subtle orchestration of industry preparing for the day. You hear it first as a distant rumble, almost imperceptible beneath the fog. The heavy, rhythmic clatter of iron-rimmed wheels on cobblestone as coal carts make their early deliveries to factory yards. The sound is distinctive, a deep, percussive roll punctuated by the occasional crack of a driver's whip, or the soft grunt of a horse straining under its load. Mainstream historical records from Victorian municipal reports note that coal deliveries were scheduled for the pre-dawn hours specifically to avoid congesting daytime streets, a logistical decision that shaped the soundscape of industrial mornings. As you move through the factory district, the symphony builds. The coal cart rumble is joined by the faint, rising whistle of steam engines being stoked to life, a sound that starts as a low moan and gradually sharpens into a clear, penetrating note that seems to vibrate in your chest. You've learned to read these auditory cues. The pitch of a whistle tells you which factory is preparing to start. The rhythm of coal cart wheels indicates the pace of deliveries. The occasional clang of metal on metal signals the beginning of maintenance work. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed an informal sound map of industrial districts, a fringe theory based on diary entries that mention listening to the city's heartbeat. Though most scholars believe practitioners relied more on visual and temporal cues than auditory ones, your pace adjusts to this growing symphony. In the deep silence of residential lanes, your taps were isolated events, each one a distinct signal in a quiet landscape. Here in the industrial quarter, your taps become part of a larger composition. You time your signals to complement, not compete with, the ambient sounds. A firm tap-tap-tap that cuts through the coal cart rumble, a sharper sequence that pierces the rising steam whistle. This isn't just practicality, it's artistry. You're not just waking workers, you're conducting the prelude to industry's daily performance. Mainstream historical accounts from factory managers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups as temporal anchors, providing reliable time cues in an era before standardized shift clocks. The fog interacts with sound in fascinating ways here. In residential areas, it muffled noise, softened edges, created pockets of quiet. In the industrial quarter, it amplifies certain frequencies while dampening others. The low rumble of coal carts carries further through the dense air. The high pitch of steam whistles cuts through the fog like a blade. The mid-range clank of tools is absorbed, muted, made intimate. You've learned to navigate this acoustic landscape, tapping firmer when fog dampens sound, allowing extra time when fog distorts distance, adjusting your position to use the fog's properties to your advantage. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed specialized techniques for foggy acoustics, a debate fueled by sparse trade manuals that mention reading the air for sound but provide few specifics. As you walk, you become aware of the symphony's structure. It's not random noise, it's a carefully orchestrated progression. The coal carts arrive first, delivering fuel for the boilers. Then the steam whistles begin, signaling that engines are building pressure. Next comes the clank of tools, the murmur of voices, the rhythmic thump of preliminary machinery checks. Each sound has its place, its timing, its purpose. You are both observer and participant in this orchestration. Your taps help ensure that the human elements, the workers, arrive in time to join the mechanical symphony. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups supposedly used the industrial soundscape to calibrate their own timing, synchronizing their final rounds with the first steam whistle as a backup to their pocket watches, a practice mentioned in colorful anecdotes, but largely dismissed by historians as logistically challenging. The cold feels different amid this growing symphony. In residential areas, it was a personal companion, a chill you managed with layers and movement. Here it's a shared condition, amplified by the contrast between the warmth of preparing machinery and the cool of the foggy air. You feel the heat radiating from factory walls where boilers are being stoked, sense the warm drafts escaping from ventilation shafts. Notice how the fog thins slightly in these thermal currents. Your body adapts automatically. You position yourself to catch brief moments of warmth, adjust your layers to manage temperature fluctuations, use the thermal dynamics of the district to your advantage. Mainstream historical records from workers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups as thermal navigators, using the heat signatures of industry to guide their routes in foggy conditions. As you approach a particularly busy intersection, the symphony reaches a new level of complexity. Coal carts rumble from multiple directions, steam whistles rise from different factories, the clank of tools echoes from various workshops. The sound is no longer distant, it's immediate, immersive, almost overwhelming. But you've learned to filter it, to focus on the cues that matter to your work. The specific whistle that signals your next stop's shift change, the particular cart rhythm that indicates your route's timing, the distinctive clang that marks your position in the district. This auditory filtering isn't conscious, it's habitual, honed through repetition. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed a form of selective hearing for industrial environments, a debate fueled by memoirs that describe tuning out the noise to hear the signal. Though most scholars consider this a universal skill rather than a specialized one, your tools feel different in this acoustic environment. The bamboo pole, so responsive in quiet residential lanes, seems to vibrate with the ambient sounds as if absorbing the energy of the industrial symphony. The tapping stick, so precise for individual signals, feels almost delicate against the robust backdrop of preparing machinery. You've learned to adjust your technique, tapping with more authority to cut through the growing noise, using broader strokes for windows that open onto noisy courtyards, timing your signals to coincide with lulls in the ambient sound. These adaptations aren't conscious, they're intuitive, honed through experience. Mainstream historical accounts from trade guides sometimes mention knocker-ups as acoustic artisans, skilled at delivering clear signals in complex soundscapes. The fog swirls around you, carrying the symphony with it. Sound travels differently through dense vapor. Some frequencies are amplified, others dampened, creating a unique acoustic signature for each moment, each location. You've learned to read these variations. When fog thickens, you tap firmer. When it thins, you can afford more subtlety. When it eddies around a corner, you adjust your position to ensure your signal carries. This isn't just practicality, it's mastery. You're not just working in the fog, you're collaborating with it, using its properties to enhance your service. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who claim to predict fog density by listening to how sound traveled through it, a skill supposedly honed through years of experience. Though most historians consider this romantic speculation rather than documented practice, as you continue your rounds, you become aware of your own place in the symphony. Your taps are no longer isolated signals, they're integral notes in a larger composition. The coal cart rumble provides the bass line, the steam whistle the melody, the clank of tools the percussion, and your taps the rhythm that ties it all together. You are not separate from the industrial morning. You are part of its essential structure. Mainstream historical records from social historians sometimes mention knocker-ups as invisible conductors of the industrial symphony. Essential but unrecognized, reliable but uncelebrated, the city is waking up around you, not with a sudden burst of noise, but with a gradual, purposeful accumulation of sound. Each new element, the distant shout of a foreman, the clatter of a gate opening, the hiss of a steam valve, adds to the symphony, building toward the crescendo of full industrial operation. You feel not overwhelmed by this growing noise, but harmonized with it. Your rhythm matches its pace, your signals complement its structure, your presence contributes to its coherence. As you approach your next stop, pole raised, ready to tap, you carry the symphony with you. The coal cart rumble, the steam whistle rise, the clank of preparing tools. It's more than background noise, it's context, collaboration, composition. And as you deliver your signal into the growing chorus of industry, you feel not just duty, but harmony. The city wakes, but you are its precise, integrated, unwavering note in the morning symphony. You pause near a wrought iron lamppost as the industrial hum settles into a steady background drone. The symphony of carts and whistles continues, but here, on the edge of a quieter square, a different ritual is unfolding. You lean your bamboo pole against your shoulder, letting your breath slow, and watch the lamplighter at work. He's a silhouette against the brightening grey, moving with the practiced grace of a man who knows this stretch of pavement better than he knows his own front door. Mainstream historical records from municipal employment ledgers note that Victorian lamplighters typically worked in rotating shifts, their morning rounds beginning just as night watchmen finished theirs, a seamless handover that kept the city's illumination cycle unbroken. It's basically the 19th century equivalent of your smart home turning off the porch lights automatically, though with significantly more wool and considerably less Wi-Fi. You watch him raise his long pole, the brass snuffer at its tip, catching the first pale light of dawn. He steps onto his small wooden platform, ascends with careful, deliberate steps, and brings the snuffer down over the gas flame. There's a soft hiss, a faint pop, and then the yellow glow vanishes, swallowed by the grey. The lamplighter doesn't rush. He moves methodically, extinguishing one jet after another, each click of the mechanism a quiet punctuation mark in the morning's awakening. You've seen this 100 times, but it never loses its quiet gravity. In these moments, the city feels suspended between two worlds, the sleeping dark you've just traversed, and the bustling day that's beginning to take shape. Historians still argue whether lamplighters followed strict municipal timetables, or adjusted the pace based on seasonal light levels and fog density, a debate fueled by conflicting council minutes that sometimes list exact hours, while personal accounts describe a more fluid, weather-responsive approach. The fog thins around you, revealing the pale wash of morning light that turns the soot-stained bricks into muted shades of slate and charcoal. The gas lamps, once bright pools of warmth, now stand as silent iron sentinels, their glass chimneys cooling in the damp air. You notice the lamplighter's routine, the slight tap of his pole against the bracket to clear accumulated soot, the quick wipe of a linen rag across the glass before he descends, the careful check of the valve to ensure no residual gas escapes. It's a small, almost meditative sequence, one that requires as much precision as your own tapping routine. The quirky truth is that some lamplighters supposedly carried tiny leather-bound notebooks to record which burners burned dimmer than others, noting patterns that helped municipal engineers predict which pipes needed maintenance. A practice that occasionally crossed into urban legend, with tales of flame readers who claimed to predict neighborhood fortunes by the exact shape of a dying gas jet. While likely embellished by local gossip, the kernel of practical observation remains. These men were the city's quiet diagnosticians, reading the health of the streets in the behavior of their lamps. You feel a strange kinship with him. You wake the sleepers. He coaxes the city out of its artificial night. Both of you work in the margins of time, performing your duties while others rest or rush. The lamplighter's extinguishing pole meets the glass with a soft metallic clink, a sound so gentle it barely registers over the distant rumble of a coal cart. You shift your weight, letting the bamboo rest more comfortably against your heavy coat. The cold is still there, but it's changing. No longer the sharp, damp chill of deep night, but the softer, more diffuse cool of early morning. The air smells different too, less coal smoke, more wet stone, less tallow, more ozone. Mainstream historical accounts from Victorian urban studies note that the transition from gaslit night to natural daylight was carefully managed by municipal workers to avoid sudden visual shocks for early risers, a subtle psychological consideration that shaped the pacing of morning routines long before circadian science entered the mainstream. As the lamplighter moves to the next post, you watch his boots find the familiar grooves in the pavement. You notice how his shadow stretches and shortens with each step, how his breath fogs in rhythmic bursts that match the pace of his work. There's a quiet poetry in it, this slow erasure of artificial light as the natural world reclaims its territory. You've learned to read the lamplighter's progress as a temporal marker. When half the lamps on your street are out, you know dawn is fully committed. When the last one clicks off, the night is officially over. It's not a clock you can wind, but it's reliable all the same. The extinguished jets cool with a soft metallic sigh, their heat dissipating into the morning air, and you let yourself linger in the observation, in the gentle cadence of fading halos and settling glass. The brightening grey light begins to wash over the cobblestones, revealing the textures you've only felt with your boots until now. The shallow depressions worn by centuries of traffic, the patches of newer stone laid after recent repairs, the faint tracks left by cartwheels that passed while you worked. You pull your scarf a little looser, allowing the cooler air to reach your neck. The lamplighter finishes his row, lowers his pole, and gives a brief, almost imperceptible nod in your direction. You return it, a silent acknowledgement between two professionals who share the quiet hours. He doesn't speak. You don't either. Words would break the spell. Instead, you both return to your tasks, your movements synchronized by the unspoken rhythm of the city's transition. You pick up your bamboo pole again, feeling the familiar weight settle into your hands, and step back into your route with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly where the night ends and the morning begins. You lift the bamboo from your shoulder and let it settle into the familiar cradle of your hands, feeling its cool, polished surface press against your wool-wrapped palms. The pole isn't dead weight, it's alive with potential energy, waiting for the first strike to awaken. You step toward the next factory dormitory, raise the shaft, and deliver a measured knock against the lower corner of a soot-filmed pane. The impact is brief, but the response is immediate. A subtle tremor travels up the length of the bamboo, through your grip, into your wrists, and settles somewhere deep in your forearms. It's a quiet vibration, almost imperceptible if you weren't trained to notice it, but to you, it's as clear as a spoken word. You've learned to read these tremors the way a musician reads string tension. Each knock tells a story about the glass thickness, the frame rigidity, the density of the wood behind it. Mainstream historical records from Victorian trade journals note that bamboo was specifically favored for street-facing tools because of its natural shock-absorbing properties. Its hollow, fibrous structure dampened jarring impacts, while preserving enough feedback to prevent shattering delicate window panes or straining the user's joints during thousands of daily repetitions. The vibration settles into a rhythm that matches your breathing, a slow, grounding pulse that anchors you to the physical world while your mind drifts through the growing dawn. Tap, tremor, pause, step. The sequence becomes a kind of tactile meditation, a haptic feedback loop that predates your smartphone's buzz alerts by a century and a half. You adjust your grip almost unconsciously, shifting your fingers a fraction of an inch the shaft to modulate the resonance. Too tight and the pole feels dead, the vibration trapped and muffled. Too loose and the energy scatters, leaving your hands numb and your taps imprecise. You've spent years finding the sweet spot, the exact pressure that allows the bamboo to sing just enough without screaming. It's a physical conversation between you and the architecture, conducted through wood and glass and damp morning air. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups swore by seasonal tuning rituals, soaking their poles in warm linseed oil mixed with a touch of beeswax to alter the resonance profile, claiming that a lightly oiled shaft produced a warm, lower-frequency tap that supposedly penetrated deeper sleep more gently than a dry, brittle pole. While modern acoustics suggests the effect would be minimal, the psychological comfort of a well-tended tool clearly mattered to practitioners who treated their equipment like extensions of their own nervous systems. You feel the vibration again as your next tap lands, this time slightly sharper as the glass proves thinner, perhaps an older pane that's warped with age. The tremor travels faster, higher in pitch, a delicate shiver that warns you to ease off the pressure immediately. Your body knows this instinctively. You've absorbed these micro-adjustments into muscle memory so deeply that you no longer think about them. You simply feel, react, and recalibrate, your hands becoming instruments of precision rather than blunt instruments of force. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed a formalized tactile assessment system to gauge structural integrity or window condition through pole feedback, a theory supported by trade anecdote proof, describing listening through the wood but lacking concrete documentary proof in surviving manuals or municipal records. Regardless of whether it was codified or intuitive, the skill was undeniably real, passed down through observation, repetition, and the quiet sharing of technique between veteran walkers and apprentices. The damp fog does little to dull the sensation. If anything, the moisture on the glass seems to amplify the initial contact, creating a softer, more diffused tremor that spreads evenly through your palms. You close your eyes for half a second, letting the vibration wash over you, grounding you in the present moment. The industrial hum continues around you, coal carts rumbling, steam valves hissing, distant voices rising, but beneath it all your own rhythm holds steady. Each knock is a small anchor, pulling you back from the drift of fatigue, reminding you of your purpose, your posture, your pace. You shift your stance slightly, rolling your shoulders to release the tension that builds from holding the pole upright for hours. The vibration fades into a gentle hum in your fingers, a residual echo that lingers long after the wood has left the glass. It's a sensation you'll carry with you, long after your shift ends, a phantom rhythm that plays in your muscles even when you're finally lying down, waiting for sleep to reclaim you. As you move to the next window, you notice how the vibration changes with the building's material. Soot-stained brick transmits a duller, more absorbed tremor. Cold stone windowsills send back a sharper, more metallic shiver. Damp wooden frames produce a muffled, almost spongy resonance that requires a slightly firmer strike to achieve the same waking effect. Your hands read these differences like braille, translating physical feedback into tactical adjustments without conscious thought. You've learned to trust this silent language, to let your body do the decoding while your mind tracks time, route, and client preferences. The morning light is strengthening now, washing the fog in pale silver, but your focus remains inward, attuned to the subtle dialogue between pole and pane. You tap again, feel the tremor rise, adjust your grip by a millimeter, and step back into the mist. The vibration is your compass, your metronome, your quiet companion in the half-light. It tells you when to press, when to ease, when to move on. And as you carry that resonance with you, hand over hand, window to window, you realize you're not just waking the city. You're feeling its bones, learning its rhythms, mapping its pulse through the gentle shiver of bamboo against glass. You identify soot-stained brick, cold stone, and damp wood as you move through the district, your gloved fingers occasionally brushing against walls to steady yourself, or to gauge the texture of the morning. The industrial quarter isn't just a soundscape or a rhythm. It's a tactile landscape, a gallery of surfaces that tell the story of labor, time, and weather. Your palm meets soot-stained brick first, a rough, granular texture that leaves a faint grey dust on your wool despite the gloves. The brick isn't just dirty, it's impregnated with decades of coal smoke. Each particle a tiny record of the factories that have belched into the sky above. You've learned to read these stains, the darker patches near ventilation shafts, the streaks that run downward after rain, the occasional clean spot where a window frame has been recently painted. Mainstream historical records from Victorian urban surveys note that industrial districts accumulated soot at rates 5 to 10 times higher than residential areas, creating a distinct visual and tactile signature that shaped everything from building maintenance schedules to public health debates about smoke nuisance and respiratory illness. You shift your grip on your pole and your fingertips find cold stone, a smoother, denser surface that conducts temperature more efficiently than brick. The stone feels almost alive with chill, drawing warmth from your gloves the moment you touch it. These are often the foundations of older warehouses, the lintels above factory doors, the sills of windows that predate the industrial boom. The stone isn't just cold, it's historically cold, having absorbed centuries of London winters, each freeze-thaw cycle leaving microscopic cracks that you can feel if you run your thumb slowly across the surface. Historians still argue whether the choice of stone versus brick in industrial architecture was driven more by cost, availability, or thermal properties, a debate fueled by conflicting builders' ledgers that sometimes prioritize economy, while architectural treatises emphasize durability in polluted environments. Damp wood appears next, usually in the form of window frames, door jambs, or the occasional wooden hoarding erected around a construction site. The texture is softer, more yielding than stone or brick, but the dampness gives it a certain resilience, a spongy resistance that absorbs your touch rather than repelling it. You've learned that damp wood requires a different tapping technique. The moisture muffles sound, so you strike slightly firmer, but the wood's flexibility means you must control your follow-through to avoid bending the frame or splintering rotten sections. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups carried tiny vials of linseed oil to lightly treat wooden frames on their route, claiming that a barely visible coating improved sound transmission and protected the wood from further decay, a practice mentioned in colourful trade anecdotes, but largely dismissed by historians as logistically impractical for nightly rounds. As you walk, you become a connoisseur of texture. Your boots report back through the soles, the gritty crunch of coal dust on cobblestone, the slick slide of wet iron grating, the soft give of moss growing in the shadowed corners of alleyways. Your coat brushes against walls, reporting back the roughness of stucco, the smoothness of painted metal, the flakiness of peeling plaster. Even the air has texture, the gritty feel of coal smoke on your tongue, the silky slip of fog against your cheeks, the prickly bite of cold that seems to have edges. These sensations aren't just background noise, they're data, helping you navigate, adjust your technique, and maintain your rhythm in a constantly changing environment. Mainstream historical accounts from workers' memoirs sometimes mention knocker-ups as tactile navigators, using touch as much as sight to move through foggy, pre-dawn streets. The textures change with the weather, of course. After rain, soot-stained brick becomes slick, almost oily to the touch, requiring more careful footing. Cold stone grows even colder, conducting the chill more efficiently, demanding thicker gloves or more frequent hand-warming pauses. Damp wood swells slightly, changing the fit of window frames and the resonance of your taps. You've learned to anticipate these shifts, to adjust your grip, your stride, your technique based on the tactile feedback of the morning. It's a form of embodied knowledge, written in your muscles and nerves rather than in any manual. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups developed formalized weather response protocols or relied solely on experiential adaptation. A debate fueled by sparse trade guides that mention adjusting to conditions but provide few specific methodologies. You pause briefly to wipe your gloved hand across a particularly soot-heavy section of brick, watching the grey dust accumulate on the wool. It's a reminder of the physical toll of your work, the constant exposure to industrial byproducts that cling to everything you touch. You've learned to manage this, washing your gloves regularly, treating your coat with water-repellent solutions, carrying a small cloth to wipe your pole's handle between taps. These aren't just hygiene measures. They're professional maintenance, ensuring that your tools and attire remain effective night after night. The quirky fringe of knocker-up lore includes tales of practitioners who claim to identify specific factories by the unique flavor of soot on their walls, a skill supposedly honed through years of tactile and olfactory observation, though most historians consider this romantic speculation rather than documented practice. As you continue your rounds, you notice how textures interact with light. The brightening dawn reveals details that were hidden in the fog, the crystalline sparkle of frost on iron railings, the subtle sheen of damp on stone, the way soot-stained brick absorbs light differently than clean mortar. You've learned to use these visual tactile cues to confirm your location, to anticipate changes in your route, to adjust your technique for different surfaces. The morning light doesn't just illuminate, it enhances texture, making the industrial landscape more legible, more navigable. Mainstream historical records from Victorian urban studies note that the transition from gas-lit night to natural daylight was carefully managed not just for visibility, but for the psychological comfort of early risers, a subtle consideration that shaped the pacing of morning routines long before ergonomic design entered the mainstream. The cold stone of a factory foundation feels different now that the sun is beginning to warm the air. It's still cool, but the chill is less penetrating, less urgent. You run your gloved palm across it one more time, feeling the subtle shift in temperature, the way the stone seems to exhale the night's cold into the morning. It's a small moment of connection, a tactile acknowledgement of the city's transition from sleep to activity. You've learned to appreciate these micro moments, these quiet interactions with the material world that ground you in your work, in your place, in your purpose. As you approach your next stop, you let your fingers trail lightly against a damp wooden window frame, feeling the grain, the moisture, the slight give of the wood under your touch. You adjust your grip on your pole accordingly, preparing for the tap that will wake another sleeper, another worker, another thread in the great tapestry of the industrial morning. The textures around you aren't just surfaces, they're stories written in soot and stone and wood, waiting to be read by hands that know how to listen. And as you raise your pole, ready to deliver another signal into the brightening dawn, you carry that tactile knowledge with you, a quiet confidence in the language of texture, in the wisdom of touch, in the gentle dialogue between hand and world that guides your steps through the waking city. You raise your bamboo pole one last time, the movement slow and deliberate, as the sun finally begins to pierce the thick London fog. The light doesn't break through all at once. It bleeds in gradually, a pale, watery gold that softens the hard edges of the city and turns the mist from grey to pearl. You're standing before a top-floor dormitory window, the highest on your route, reserved for the night shift supervisor who finally returns to sleep just as your own work draws to a close. Mainstream historical records from 19th century factory regulations note that shift supervisors often worked grueling 16-hour rotations, their rest windows deliberately staggered to ensure continuous oversight, a scheduling quirk that left them entirely dependent on your pre-dawn taps to catch their few precious hours of sleep. The pole meets the glass with a gentle final rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is lighter than it was hours ago, not because your strength has faded, but because the morning air carries it differently now. The fog is thinning, the acoustic dampening lifting, allowing the tap to ring out with a clear, crystalline tone that seems to hang in the cooling glass. You wait as you always do, but your posture is different. Your shoulders drop slightly. The rigid focus of the early hours begins to melt into a quiet, earned relief. Inside the window, the curtain stirs. A shadow passes, the faint click of a latch being tested. You catch a glimpse of a sleep-heavy face leaning into the pale light before disappearing back into the room. The signal is complete. Your route is finished. Mainstream trade logs from the era show that the final wake-up on a knocker-up's route typically fell between 5:30 and 6 a.m., a hard boundary dictated not by personal preference, but by municipal labour laws that began to formalize morning work hours in the 1840s. You lower the pole, letting its weight rest comfortably against your shoulder, and take a slow, deep breath. The air tastes cleaner now, the sharp coal smoke giving way to the damp, earthy scent of waking pavement. You can hear the city shifting around you. Somewhere down the block, a shopkeeper rolls up a metal shutter. A baker's boy calls out to a milk cart. The rhythmic clatter of boots on cobblestone multiplies as day labourers spill into the streets. It's the great turning of the tide. The quiet, intimate hours you've navigated for hours are dissolving into the public, noisy reality of daybreak. Historians still argue whether the exact timing of knocker-up's final routes was dictated by factory whistles or by informal neighbourhood agreements, a debate fueled by conflicting municipal records that sometimes list official start times, while personal diaries describe a more fluid, community-driven pacing. You pivot slowly on your heel, your boots finding the familiar groove in the wet stone. The pole in your hand feels different now, less like a tool of precision and more like a companion seeing you safely home. You run your thumb along the warm bamboo, feeling the familiar grain, the slight dents from countless mornings, the subtle curve shaped by your own grip. The quirky truth is that some veteran knocker-ups would carve a single, nearly invisible notch into their pole after completing a full season without a single missed client, treating the wooden shaft almost like a sailor's tally stick, a personal record of reliability that no employer ever asked to see. But that meant everything to the practitioner. While modern archivists consider this a largely undocumented folk tradition, it speaks to the quiet pride embedded in a job that required absolute consistency. You begin the walk back, your pace noticeably slower than it was in the dark. The urgency is gone, the schedule is met. You no longer need to count minutes or calculate distances. You simply move, letting your body follow the well-worn path you've taken so many times it could guide itself blindfolded. The fog continues to lift in slow, rolling waves, revealing rooftops dusted with coal ash, chimney pots lie up like silent sentinels, and the pale sky stretching endlessly above. You watch the light catch the edges of slate tiles, turning them from dull grey to shimmering silver. It's a view you rarely see up close in the deep night, and you pause to let it settle over you, a quiet reward for hours of unseen labour. Mainstream meteorological studies from the Victorian period note that morning fog in industrial London typically burned off between 5:45 and 6:30 a.m, depending on wind speed and river temperature, creating a daily visual reveal that many early risers took for granted. But that night, workers like you witnessed as a gradual, almost theatrical unveiling. A sparrow drops from a nearby windowsill, landing on the damp cobblestone with a soft tap of its own. It pecks once at a stray crumb, then hops into the gutter, completely indifferent to your presence. You smile faintly beneath your scarf. The city belongs to the daywalkers now, but you earned this quiet moment of transition. You adjust your grip on the pole, shifting its weight to the opposite shoulder to relieve the familiar ache in your trapezius. The movement is automatic, practiced, a small act of self-care that you've learned over years of pre-dawn rounds. You don't rush. Rushing belongs to the morning crowd, to the clerks hurrying to counting houses, to the apprentices darting toward workshops. Your job is done. Your rhythm has shifted from purposeful urgency to steady retreat. Historians still argue whether knocker-ups experienced a measurable drop in cortisol levels after their final tap, a fringe physiological theory based on modern reconstructions of historical labour patterns, though most scholars dismiss it as anachronistic, preferring to focus on documented social and economic impacts instead. You pass a corner bakery, its windows glowing with warm, buttery light. The smell of fresh bread rolls across the street, rich and yeasty, a stark contrast to the cold damp air you've breathed for hours. A woman inside kneads dough, her arms moving with practiced rhythmic strength. She doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. You're part of the invisible machinery that makes her morning possible, just as your wake-up calls made the delivery of her flour and the maintenance of her ovens possible. You nod slightly as you pass, a silent acknowledgement of shared labour across different shifts, different roles, different hours. The quirky fringe of knocker-up folklore includes tales of bakers leaving warm loaves on doorsteps for particularly reliable night walkers, a gesture of neighbourhood gratitude that supposedly sustained many practitioners through harsh winters. While likely romanticised, the underlying truth of mutual reliance in working-class districts is well documented in parish records and mutual aid society ledgers. The sun climbs higher now, casting long, sharp shadows across the pavement. The fog is nearly gone, retreating into narrow alleys and damp courtyards where it clings stubbornly to the last remnants of night. You feel its absence on your face, the cool air replaced by a gentle, early warmth that seeps through your wool coat. Your boots sound different on the cobblestones now, the clicks sharper, the rhythm less measured, almost conversational. You've done the quiet work. You've moved through the sleeping city like a careful ghost, touching windows, waking sleepers, keeping time. Now, you're just a man walking home. Mainstream labour histories note that the physical and psychological boundary between night and day work was rarely acknowledged in 19th century wage structures, yet practitioners of nocturnal trades like knocker-ups, night watchmen, and early bakers consistently described a profound sense of temporal transition, a daily crossing from one world to another that shaped their routines, their sleep cycles, and their sense of place in the urban ecosystem. You adjust your scarf one last time, letting it hang looser around your neck, and continue toward your street. The pole rests lightly against your back, its job complete until tonight. The morning bustle grows around you, but you move through it at your own pace, untethered from the rush, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a route finished exactly as planned. The city is fully awake now, but you remember its silence, you remember its fog, you remember the gentle tap-tap-tap that bridged the two. And as your home street comes into view, familiar and unassuming, you feel the day shift from responsibility to rest. A slow, steady exhale that matches the rhythm of your steps. The clatter around you grows, layer upon layer of sound stacking into a dense living chorus. A horse-drawn dray rattles over the stones, its iron wheels catching on the grooves you've memorized in the dark. A shopkeeper throws open wooden shutters with a sharp, splintering crack that echoes off the brick. Street vendors begin their calls, voices rough but rhythmic, trading prices and greetings in the damp morning air. You stand for a moment near a crossing, letting the noise wash over you. It's a strange sensation. Hours ago, this same street held its breath, waiting for your gentle taps to stir it awake. Now, the city has fully claimed the day, and the urgency that once drove your steps dissolves into something quieter, steadier. Mainstream municipal records from the mid-19th century document the dramatic shift in urban soundscapes, noting that street noise levels in London doubled between the hours of 4 and 6:30 a.m. as commerce, transport and labour intersected in a chaotic but predictable surge. City councils even drafted early ordinances limiting cart traffic during these transition hours, though enforcement was notoriously haphazard, leaving residents to adapt through a combination of patience, closed windows, and heavy curtains. You adjust your coat, feeling the familiar weight of it no longer as armor, but as a well-earned blanket. Your work is done. The list is cleared. There's a profound peace in that completion, a mental quiet that settles over you, even as the physical world grows louder. You don't need to count paces anymore. You don't need to track the minutes or worry about the exact angle of your pole against glass. The pressure lifts from your shoulders like a physical thing, leaving behind a lightness that makes your steps almost float. It's the quiet triumph of consistency, the small reward for showing up when others were still dreaming. Historians still argue whether the psychological relief experienced by night workers at dawn was documented in contemporary medical journals or primarily captured in literary accounts of urban labour, a debate that highlights the gap between clinical observation and the lived, sensory reality of shift work in the Victorian era. Regardless of where it was recorded, that feeling is unmistakable. A gradual unwinding, a slow release of tension, a return to yourself. You tuck your hands into your pocket, letting the bamboo pole rest diagonally across your back. The morning bustle doesn't bother you. It's just background texture now, like rain on a roof or a distant train whistle. You watch a group of clerks hurry past, their boots striking the pavement in frantic, uneven rhythms. They're already late, already worried, already carrying the weight of ledgers and deadlines before the sun has even cleared the rooftops. You feel a quiet detachment from their rush. Your day is essentially over, while theirs is just beginning. The quirky truth is that some veteran knocker-ups reportedly carried small, smooth pieces of river slate in their coat pockets, rubbing them between their fingers during the walk home to ground themselves after hours of hyper-focused tapping, a tactile reset that supposedly helped quiet the nervous system and ease the transition back into civilian life. While occupational researchers today might classify it as early sensory regulation, back then it was just an unspoken habit passed down through the night-walking circles, a quiet trick for surviving the shift. The light continues to strengthen, turning the wet cobblestones into mirrors that reflect the pale sky and the busy figures moving through it. You find yourself smiling at small, ordinary things, a cat stretching on a windowsill, a baker dusting flour from his apron, a street sweeper pushing a stiff broom through the gutter. These aren't grand moments, but they're yours, observed from the comfortable distance of someone who has finished their duty. Mainstream social histories of 19th century London note that early morning street vendors and sweepers often operated on informal schedules that overlapped with the end of knocker-up routes, creating a brief window of shared quietude before the full commercial rush took over. This overlapping rhythm fostered a kind of unspoken camaraderie among early risers, a network of nods and murmured greetings that required no introduction. You've been part of it for years, a silent member of a morning chorus that speaks in gestures rather than words. You turn down a slightly narrower lane, the one that leads toward your own district. The noise recedes slightly here, muffled by taller buildings and the lingering dampness in the air. You let your breathing sync with your steps again, not for timing this time, but for comfort. In, out, slow and steady. The bamboo pole taps lightly against your shoulder with each stride, a gentle metronome marking your retreat. You think about the bed waiting for you, the thin mattress, the worn blankets, the familiar indent your body has made over countless mornings. It's not luxurious, but it's yours, and right now, it sounds like the most comfortable place in the world. Historians still argue whether the sleep patterns of nocturnal workers like knocker-ups were significantly more fragmented than those of daytime laborers, with some modern reconstructions suggesting that consistent pre-dawn routines actually stabilized circadian rhythms over time, while contemporary diaries describe chronic exhaustion and reliance on midday naps. The truth probably lived somewhere in the messy middle, shaped by weather, workload, and the simple human capacity to adapt. A milk cart passes you, the horse's hooves ringing sharply against the stone. The driver tips his cap as he goes by, a silent acknowledgement of shared terrain. You return the gesture without breaking your pace. There's no need to stop, no need to explain. You're just a man walking home after a long night, carrying his tools, wearing his quiet like a second coat. The city roars around you, but you've already stepped out of its current. You're drifting now, caught in the gentle undertow of approaching rest. The fog is gone, the sun is up. The streets are full, but none of it belongs to you anymore. Not for a few hours, anyway. You've given your focus to the sleeping, your time to the waking, your rhythm to the turning of the day. And as you continue down the lane, the noise fading into a comfortable hum, you let yourself sink into the simple, unadorned peace of a job well done. The morning belongs to them. The quiet finally belongs to you. You turn the corner toward your own street, letting the familiar landmarks guide your steps without conscious thought. The route is etched into your muscles now, a reverse playback of the journey you took hours earlier in the dark. But this morning version of your path feels entirely different. Where you once moved through shadows, you now walk through a sun-tinged corridor of opening doors and sweeping brooms. You keep to the edges of the pavement, not out of habit, but out of choice. There's a distinct comfort in watching the morning bustle from a slight distance, like standing on a quiet balcony overlooking a busy market while finally sitting down. You're no longer the conductor of this scene. You're just an audience member, allowed to let the performance play out without you holding the tempo. Mainstream urban histories of the Victorian era note that pedestrian traffic in working-class districts peaked sharply between 6 and 7:30 in the morning, creating a predictable but chaotic flow of labourers, apprentices, and domestic servants that municipal planners tried and failed to regulate through staggered shift times. A logistical puzzle you navigate daily by simply knowing which alleys clear first and which main thoroughfares to avoid. You lean against a damp brick wall near a crossing, letting the pole rest vertically beside you as you observe the tide of humanity. A group of dock workers marches past in loose formation, their boots striking the stones in a heavy, synchronized rhythm that echoes off the narrow facades. A flower seller arranges wilted blooms in a wooden crate, her voice carrying a bright, melodic cadence that contrasts with the gruff shouts of a coal merchant, haggling with a driver. You watch it all with a kind of detached fascination. Hours ago, this same intersection was a silent theatre of gaslight and fog, where your taps were the only script. Now, it's a living, breathing organism, and you feel absolutely no urge to step back into the fray. You're exactly where you need to be, on the sidelines, breathing steady air, feeling the pale morning sun warm the side of your face. It's the 19th century equivalent of finally closing 47 browser tabs in your brain, letting the mental clutter settle as you step out of the workflow and back into your own quiet. The sun climbs higher, casting long, sharp shadows that stretch across the pavement like dark fingers. You watch how the light catches the brass buttons on a constable's coat, how it glints off the polished glass of a passing omnibus, how it turns the puddles into fleeting mirrors of the sky. You've spent your life reading the night's textures, but the day's colours have a soft, steady beauty of their own, especially when viewed from the calm centre of your own exhaustion. The quirky fringe of knocker-up folklore mentions a practice called wall leaning, where veteran night walkers would pause at specific, sun-warmed brick corners on their return route, pressing their backs against the masonry to draw out the last of the night's chill, and soak up just enough morning heat to ward off the sudden temperature drop that often hit right before sleep. While contemporary physicians dismissed it as old wives' superstition, modern thermoregulation studies suggest that brief exposure to morning sunlight and conductive heat actually does help stabilize core body temperature after a prolonged cold shift, making it a quietly effective folk remedy dressed in urban legend. You shift your weight, feeling the familiar ache in your lower back and the pleasant stiffness in your shoulders. The noise around you swells, then ebbs, then swells again, a tidal rhythm you no longer need to monitor. You let your eyes half close, listening without straining, observing without focusing. A baker's boy drops a tray of rolls and curses softly under his breath, while a woman at a window above shakes out a wool blanket, sending a cloud of dust dancing into the light. You smile faintly. It's all so ordinary, so wonderfully, relentlessly alive, and you've already done your part to set it in motion. Historians still argue whether the psychological detachment reported by 19th century night workers was a deliberate professional boundary they cultivated to preserve mental health, or simply a physiological symptom of prolonged sleep deprivation and circadian disruption, a debate that highlights the ongoing tension between lived labor experience and clinical retrospective analysis. You don't care about the academic framing. You just know that stepping back from the current feels good. It feels like permission to stop moving. You push off the wall and resume your walk, but your pace is noticeably slower, almost drifting. The bamboo pole swings gently against your leg, a metronome ticking down to rest. You pass a row of terraced houses, their doors already open, their thresholds cluttered with the debris of starting a day. Empty milk cans, dustpans, children's wooden toys left on the step. You step carefully around them, your boots finding the clear patches without looking down. This is the world you return to every morning, a world that doesn't know your name but depends entirely on your reliability. You don't resent the anonymity. In fact, you prefer it. There's a certain freedom in being the invisible gear that keeps the clock turning, in knowing your work speaks for itself through punctuality rather than presence. Mainstream trade directories from the 1860s occasionally list knocker-ups under miscellaneous urban services, a catch-all category that reflects how their labor was viewed. Essential but background, structural but uncelebrated, woven so tightly into the city's fabric that it barely registers as a separate thread. The sun is fully up now, burning off the last stubborn patches of mist that clung to the lower eaves. You squint slightly, pulling your cap lower to block the glare. Your route home is short from here. Just a few more turns down familiar lanes, past the corner pub with its freshly swept stoop, past the ironmonger's shop with its rattling security grate, past the narrow alley that smells faintly of yeast and wood smoke. You know every crack in the pavement, every leaning sign, every patch of wall that holds the sun just a little longer. You walk them with the ease of long repetition, your body on autopilot while your mind finally begins to quiet. The bustle fades into a comfortable hum, the crowd thins into familiar faces, and the morning settles into its steady, predictable rhythm. You're almost there. The weight of the pole is the only thing reminding you of the hours behind you, and even that feels lighter now, shedding its purpose with every step toward your own door. You reach your door at last, the familiar wooden frame waiting just past the turning of your own lane. The brass latch is worn smooth by years of your thumb, its metal cool against your skin as you lift it. The door swings inward with a soft, well-oiled sigh and you step across the threshold, pulling it shut behind you. The heavy click of the bolt sliding home acts like a physical switch, instantly severing the street's clamor from your world. The sudden quiet is profound, almost ringing. You lean your forehead briefly against the wood, letting the muffled hum of the waking city settle into a distant, harmless bass line. You're finally off the clock. You've crossed the final line between public duty and private sanctuary, and the relief that washes over you is so complete it feels like taking off a heavy invisible pack after a long climb. The room is exactly as you left it, small, sparse, and waiting in the half-light that filters through the curtained window. Dust motes drift lazily in the pale morning beams, catching the faint warmth of the sun that hasn't yet reached the floorboards. You breathe in deeply, and the air tastes familiar. Old paper, dried lavender tucked in a drawer, the faint, comforting musk of wool that has seen too many damp nights but never lost its shape. It's not grand, but it's yours, a quiet pocket of the world where the only demands are the ones you choose to meet. You shrug off your heavy outer coat, letting it slide onto the wooden peg by the door. The wool lands with a soft thud, releasing a final sigh of trapped night air. You unbutton the waistcoat, peel off the fingerless gloves, and drape the damp scarf over a chair back. Each layer removed is another step away from the fog, the cold, the relentless rhythm of the route. Now comes the ritual of the tools. You lift the long bamboo pole from your shoulder, holding it with both hands as you carry it to its designated spot along the far wall. The wood is cool to the touch, slightly damp from hours in the mist, but otherwise unharmed. You run your fingers along its length one last time, checking for new cracks, loose fibers, or warping. Satisfied, you take a clean dry cloth from a shelf and wipe down the shaft, working the moisture from the pores before it can settle. Mainstream historical accounts of Victorian working-class housing note that tool maintenance in single-room lodgings was a highly structured practice, with specific walls or alcoves designated for dry storage to protect wooden implements from indoor dampness and hearth smoke, often a matter of economic survival, since replacing a well-seasoned bamboo pole could cost a week's wages or more. You know this better than anyone. Your livelihood depends on the reliability of what you're holding, and treating it with care is simply good business. Once the pole is dry, you position it carefully against the wall, resting the padded tapping end on a small wooden block to keep it off the floor. The fit is precise, almost ceremonial. It sits exactly where it has sat every morning for years, angled slightly away from the window to avoid direct sunlight, which you've learned can dry the bamboo too quickly and invite splitting. The shorter hickory stick goes next to it, its leather-wrapped handle tucked neatly into a shallow bracket you carved into the plaster yourself. You adjust the angle by a fraction of an inch, ensuring neither tool bears uneven weight or risks bending overnight. The quirky fringe of knocker-up folklore claims that many veteran practitioners drove a single, rusted iron nail into the wall above their tools and tied a faded length of red wool around it, believing the iron kept the wood from warping, while the red wool absorbed any lingering night energy from a difficult route. While modern conservators would call it superstition and carpenters would blame humidity, the ritual clearly served a psychological purpose, transforming a simple storage spot into a quiet shrine to reliability. You step back, hands in your pockets, and just look at them. The pole and the stick, resting in their familiar alignment, look almost peaceful. They've served you well tonight, absorbing shocks, transmitting rhythms, translating intention into sound. You feel a strange, quiet gratitude toward inanimate objects that don't ask for praise but quietly hold up their end of the bargain. Historians still argue whether the specific placement of waking tools in 19th century lodgings followed regional customs, practical ergonomics, or deeply ingrained superstition. A debate that highlights how the boundary between occupational habit and personal ritual often blurred in the cramped, tool-heavy homes of the working class. You don't need to categorize it. You just know that seeing them exactly where they belong settles something in your chest. The route is archived, the equipment is secured, the shift is officially closed. You move to the small wash basin, pouring lukewarm water from a ceramic pitcher into your hands. The water is cool, a final gentle shock that wakes your skin before you let it rest again. You rub the day's soot and street grime from your knuckles, watching the grey water swirl down the drain. The soap smells faintly of lye and pine, sharp but clean. You dry your hands on a rough linen towel, feeling the fabric catch on your calluses, each ridge a map of years spent gripping bamboo, counting windows, and keeping time in the dark. The city outside continues its march, boots stone-cart wheels on iron, voices hauling across the square. But in here, time has slowed to a crawl. You sit on the edge of the narrow wooden chair, letting your shoulders drop, your breathing deepen, your focus soften. The room feels like a held breath finally released. You listen to the quiet settle over everything. The creak of the floorboards as the building adjusts to the warming air, the distant rhythmic sweep of a broom down the hall, the soft sigh of wind against the glass. You reach out and gently tap the wooden peg by the door, once, twice, a silent acknowledgement to the space itself. Tomorrow, you'll wake the sleepers again. Tomorrow, you'll feel the fog, read the windows, keep the rhythm. But tonight you're done. The tools are leaned against the wall exactly as they should be, waiting patiently for the dark to return. You lean back in the chair, closing your eyes just for a moment, letting the stillness of the room wrap around you like a heavy blanket. The transition is already beginning, a slow, quiet drift from motion to stillness, from duty to rest. You don't rush it, you let it come. You push yourself up from the wooden chair, feeling the familiar stiffness in your joints, and begin the final shedding of the day's weight. Your fingers work slowly at the leather laces of your boots, pulling them free with soft, deliberate tugs. The stiff leather peels away from your ankles, and the relief is instant. A quiet sigh traveling up your calves as your feet finally meet the worn floorboards, bare and unencumbered. You set the boots neatly beside the chair, toes pointing toward the wall, and unbutton your trousers. The heavy wool slides down your legs, pooling around your boots before you fold it over your knee and place it on a low stool. Every layer you remove is another anchor cut, another tether to the cold, damp streets loosened until you're left in your thin linen undershirt and drawers, vulnerable but entirely at peace. You move toward the narrow bed frame, a simple iron and wood construction that has held your shape through countless mornings. The mattress is stuffed with a mix of flocked wool and straw, a standard combination in working-class lodgings that flattened over time to match the exact contour of your shoulders and hips. Mainstream historical records from 19th century housing surveys note that while wealthier households enjoyed feather-stuffed mattresses and layered linens, laborers typically relied on tightly packed flock that retained body heat efficiently, but required regular beating to prevent compaction and pest accumulation. A rhythmic maintenance task you perform faithfully every Sunday. You pull back the heavy quilt, the rough wool blanket catching slightly against your fingers, and slide beneath the covers. The initial shock of the linens is cool, a sharp contrast to your skin, but you don't flinch. You've learned the rhythm of the bed. You lie still, letting your body heat seep into the fibers, trusting the insulation to trap it, waiting for the familiar transformation from cold to comfort. The blanket settles over you like a weighted shield, pressing gently against your chest, your legs, your tired arms. You turn onto your side, pulling the edge of the quilt up to your chin, and let your eyes drift shut. Outside, the city is fully awake. The rhythmic clatter of cartwheels on iron-rimmed axles down the lane. A street vendor's call rises above the hum, sharp and melodic. Children's footsteps patter past your window, light and hurried. But in here, the noise doesn't reach you. It becomes a distant, muffled river, a sound you float above rather than drown in. Historians still argue whether the Victorian working class practiced a true two-shift sleep pattern, awake at night, napping in the afternoon, and sleeping deeply in the early morning, or if this model is a modern retrospective projection applied to fragmented diary entries and employer time logs. Whatever the academic consensus, your own physiology knows only the undeniable pull of exhaustion and the quiet surrender to the mattress. You shift your legs slightly, seeking the spot where the blankets have already warmed, and feel a profound, almost gravitational heaviness settle into your bones. The quirky truth is that some knocker-ups kept a small slate-wrapped brick near the hearth, heating it during their evening preparations and sliding it to the foot of their bed before lying down. A humble, centuries-old practice that ensured their toes thawed within minutes and signaled to their nervous system that rest was finally permitted. You don't have a brick tonight, but the memory of its warmth is enough. You let your breathing slow, matching it to the faint, steady tick of a wall clock 3 rooms away, each second stretching slightly longer, slightly softer. Your hands, once so tightly wrapped around bamboo, lie open on the sheets, palms facing upward, completely unclenched. The day's route plays in your mind not as a list of demands, but as a series of completed images. The weaver's curtain twitching, the fog swirling around iron railings, the lamplighter's gentle hiss, the factory's rhythmic vibration. Each moment is filed away, each task accounted for, each window left safely behind. The street noise swells briefly. A shouted greeting, a slamming door, the sharp bark of a dog, and then fades into the steady background hum of a city in motion. You don't tense, you let it wash over you, a sound you no longer need to navigate, only to hear. Your muscles release one by one, surrendering to the pull of the mattress, to the weight of the blanket, to the deep, quiet gravity of the morning. The transition is effortless now. The sharp edges of the night dissolve into a soft, grey stillness. The damp chill in your hair gives way to the gentle warmth of your own breath beneath the quilt. Your fingers curl slightly against the linen, then go slack. The room feels smaller, safe, wrapped in the quiet hum of a day that has already begun without you. You breathe in, you breathe out, the rhythm slows. The weight deepens, the street fades, and as the final tension leaves your shoulders, you slip beneath the surface of wakefulness, carried gently into the quiet dark, ready to sleep while the world moves on. The room holds its breath as you settle deeper into the mattress, the rough wool blanket tucking around you like an old, familiar promise. Every heavy breath slows, every quiet thought softens until the day's sharp edges blur into a gentle, rolling calm. You don't need to keep track of time anymore. You don't need to listen for cues or watch for signals or measure the distance between stops. The cobblestones are still, the fog has lifted, the pole rests against the wall, and your hands are finally at rest. Outside, the city hums with its steady, reliable rhythm, but in here, there is only warmth, only quiet, only the slow, steady drift into a deep and uninterrupted peace. Let the morning belong to everyone else. You've already done your part. Close your eyes, feel the weight of the covers, listen to your own breathing, and let yourself fall softly into sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.